Good morning, everyone. The time now being 10:00 something, 10:03, 10:04. Who's counting? I call this hearing of the Joint Committee on Telecommunications to order. And today we're going to be hearing legislation on grid modernization, green financing, environmental justice, and competitive supply. We have a host of witnesses who have signed up to testify. We will call them in the order that they did sign up, and would remind folks we do have 35 witnesses. So if you could limit your testimony to 3 minutes, that would be desirable. I will help you along if you can't calculate the 3 minutes. I believe there is a timer up there. Also remind you that written testimony is always welcome, and guess what? There's absolutely no limit on the size of written testimony that you can submit. So thank you all for being here. I will introduce my colleagues. Oh, Siri is talking to me now. I'm not talking to you. I'll introduce my colleagues who are here. We have Representative Steve Owens and the Vice Chair, Rich Haggerty, and I'm sure that others will be joining us as the hearing goes on. Do I have any of our friends online? Rep Souza is out there? Okay, excellent. So Rep Priscilla Souza is joining us as well, and as the others come in, I will introduce them. So I don't see anyone from the Attorney General's office yet. So we will move on to the second witnesses, which are Kyle Murray. Is Kyle here? With Rep Blay. Is she up online there? Rep Blay. All right. Well, what, you want to wait for her to come? Yeah. All right. I don't see Rep Sabadosa. Look at how quickly we're going through this list. This is beautiful. So we have Reverend Mariana White Hammond. Okay. Okay. Well, guess what, Carrie? You got it. You get to kick us off. How's that? And I also want to acknowledge that Representative Steve Howitt is joining us online as well.
Okay.
So, Carrie, all yours.
Thank you. So my name is Carrie Katayan. I'm testifying on behalf of Green Energy Consumers Alliance in support of H3196 and S2106. After 2 decades, we now know that the retail electricity sector is an experiment in deregulation that has consistently failed to deliver its promised results. Thanks to the great work of the Attorney General's office, it is clear that this industry disproportionately targets and overcharges low-income households and increases the yearly electrical bill of its customers by an average of $261 compared to what they would otherwise pay. Residential competitive suppliers do not survive by offering a better or cheaper product, but through predatory business practices. Documented practices by these companies include salespeople pretending to be from a utility or city, offering customers contracts with low initial rates that later automatically re-enroll them into plans with much higher rates, and signing up to people to plans without their knowledge or consent. These issues are not the domain of just a few bad actors, and they're not even unique to the Commonwealth. Residential competitive suppliers have a history of overcharging their customers and behaving in a predatory manner in states that allow them. The states of Connecticut, Illinois, Maryland, New York, Pennsylvania, and Rhode Island have all done analyses finding that these suppliers charge their customers significantly more than their local utilities, and many have documented the same widespread unethical business practices by these companies. Passing H3196 and S2106 will lower electricity prices and protect residents of the Commonwealth from fraud. It will do so by eliminating an industry that has consistently failed to create value and instead merely extracted it, often from the members of our society who can least afford it. Finally, your committee will soon be holding hearings on bills supporting the model of municipal aggregation. There are 3 ways consumers of investor-owned utilities can buy energy supply: basic service, retail, or municipal aggregation. For residential customers, municipal aggregation can reduce prices and provide choice, just like retail electricity was supposed to, but with a far better track record of delivering savings and far less fraud. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to testify on this legislation.
Thank you so much. Let me see if there are any questions from the panel that's here. And how about our friends who are out online? Any questions? Seeing none, I thank you for your testimony, and we'll take it under consideration. And I see that our Attorney General is here, and if you're ready, we're ready for you. And you're here to talk to us about home equity theft, is that right?
I care about that too.
I know you do.
Good to see all of you.
Great to see you.
And good morning, everyone. And good morning, of course, Chairman Roy, and to the entire members of the committee. Long time no see. Good to see all of you. And I always like to start from a place of gratitude. Thanks for the work that you do in your respective districts, of course. And also thank you for taking me out of turn. So I want to extend that gratitude to the folks who are behind me. I really appreciate it. As you know, as your Attorney General and the Commonwealth's ratepayer advocate, I appear before you today in support of an act relative to electric ratepayer protections, which is Senate Bill 2106, House Bill 3196. It is an absolute honor to serve in these roles, and I look forward to partnering with this committee in protecting ratepayers, which of course are your constituents and mine. I appreciate the work of my legislative partners and the bill's sponsors, Leader Frank Mirin and Senator Brendan Crichton, who have demonstrated tremendous leadership on this issue, as well as my former colleague on the Boston City Council, Mayor Michelle Wu, who's also signed on to this legislation, and I'm grateful that she's helped shine a light on this predatory industry. From Boston to Lawrence to Lynn and beyond, we have seen again and again Massachusetts residents being targeted by competitive electric suppliers. And these suppliers use deceptive marketing tactics that hide the fact that their products do not provide consumers with meaningful savings and in fact can result in higher utility bills. These problems are not isolated to one or two bad actors. Actually, to the contrary, we think this common sales pitch is deceptive precisely because it has to be. The data here in Massachusetts and in other states show time and time again, year after year, that most consumers who sign up for these products end up losing money. You will hear from Liz Anderson, my Division Chief of Energy and Telecommunications, who's actually appearing virtually, as well as Melissa Armstrong, obviously, who is the supervising consumer specialist in our Consumer Advocacy and Response Division, the CARD team. They serve on the front lines, responding to consumer complaints that we receive in the office and that we then, of course, forward to ETD, to Liz's team to respond to. I also want to acknowledge that Melissa's joined by many members of our CARD team who are standing in the back, who I can't stress enough. All of your constituents call, they use hotlines. These folks take those calls and are extremely responsive, so I want to extend gratitude to them. So who are these competitive electric suppliers? When the Restructuring Act was signed into law in 1997, the competitive electric supply market was created with the intent to drive down electricity prices for consumers. For the most part, this experiment has worked. Commercial and industrial customers can negotiate with these suppliers for rates that work best for their business. Towns and cities can aggregate their load and secure long-term contracts that are in the best interests of their citizens, also, of course, known as municipal aggregation. But there was one piece of this experiment that has absolutely failed: the individual residential electric supply market. Why hasn't it worked? Because suppliers will tell you that if you leave your utility company and sign up with them, they will lower your bills, they'll help you achieve savings, and they'll get you green, clean energy. They are relentless. They go door to door. They make calls. They fill your mailboxes with promises. In the short time since I've even taken office as your Attorney General, they've knocked on my door. But these promises are false. Signing up with a competitive electric supplier typically results in higher utility bills over time. In May of this year, the office released a report finding that in the last 6 years, individual residential customers who received their electric supply from competitive suppliers paid a total of $525 million more on their electric bills than they would have paid if they stayed with their utility companies. We recently analyzed data for a seventh year, July 2021 through July 2022, and found that customers lost an additional $82 million for a total of $607 million in net consumer losses. Year after year, the data continues to show that this profound economic injustice hits low-income communities and communities of color the hardest. Our report found that, for example, low-income customers in Massachusetts are nearly twice as likely to sign up with individual competitive electric suppliers, and that they are also charged higher rates than non-low-income customers. Assuming 600 kilowatt per hour per month usage, an average non-low-income customer who signed up with a competitive supplier during the study period lost $222 per year, while the average low-income customer lost $254 per year. Low-income customers collectively experienced an annual net loss of over $20 million due to higher rates and additional monthly fees. The continuation of these consumer losses disproportionately are borne by residents in zip codes all across the state, with higher concentrations of low-income residents, residents of color, which of course include many of our gateway communities, Springfield, Worcester, Fall River, Lowell, Lawrence, and Lynn, just to name a few. The numbers are one thing, but we also engage with the consumers. There's a human cost to this. These are people. These are customers who are low income. These are customers who are of color. These are customers living in environmental justice communities where, frankly, they have been underserved for a long time and have borne the brunt of so many other environmental injustices. It's egregious that we allow this industry to continue to harm and prey upon our people who are really struggling to pay basic necessities like food, housing, and their utilities. And based on our experience, we should expect that as long as competitive suppliers are allowed to continue to sign up new customers, these issues will continue to occur. Any savings that customers may see from signing up with a supplier are almost always small and short-lived in comparison to the significant and ongoing customer losses. The individual residential supply market has existed in Massachusetts for about 25 years. And from our vantage point, it has absolutely failed. It has been tried in other states too, and studies in those states show that it failed in those places as well. And fixes proposed by the industry, even if some of them may take a step in the right direction, they will not stop these problems from continuing occurring, and they will not stop the complaints that we continue to receive in the office. And Liz Anderson will explain more directly on that. The industry has shown time and time again, year after year, that despite the Commonwealth's strong consumer protection laws and our office's multiple enforcement efforts, they will continue to prey upon these communities. Now, I expect, and I'm going to wrap up here, that you will have some questions in mind, and I want to take a moment to answer them. And of course, I'm happy to answer more at the end. Your first question, and I know we've received this, is do we really need to put this industry out of business? Shouldn't we just enhance the consumer protections? Well, here's my answer. It's quite simple. Suppliers are not currently
Are you
complying.
reading my notes?
We're aligned. But we heard it when we testified before and here. Suppliers are not currently complying with existing regulations that we have now. And we have some of the best laws in the country when it comes to consumer protection. It has never, for example, been legal in Massachusetts to misrepresent savings or to imply that you are representing, say, Eversource or National Grid, which many folks are doing when they are going out to pitch their products. However, we, of course, hear from consumers all the time that they are saying they're going to save a certain amount of money, that they are also representing National Grid and Eversource, which we know is not the case. Suppliers are not complying with the existing regulations, so there is no reason for us to think they will comply with any new regulations. That's not going to fix the problem. You may also wonder, well, haven't some people been able to save some money? Aren't there good competitive offers on the DPU's energy shopping website? Our numbers are on net, meaning the calculations include any savings that may have been realized by customers. The losses are staggering and overwhelming compared to the meager savings that may be realized from time to time. It's too overwhelming to just have a small solution. We need one that actually solves the problem. And lastly, you may also point out that basic service rates were really high this past winter. And don't we think consumers would have gotten a better deal if they were able to sign up with these competitive electric suppliers? No. It is true that basic service rates spiked to record high amounts, sadly, in the winter, but we still do not think the competitive suppliers are the answer. This is because a customer can sign up with a supplier for a rate that will save them money in the beginning, but it takes just 1 month, and we've heard this from thousands of constituents, of a particularly high variable rate, just 1 month to wipe out all of those savings. The data consistently shows that over time, suppliers do not save money, even if the customer experiences initial savings. It's time, and we think past time, to ban competitive electric suppliers from signing up new individual residential customers. We're not talking about commercial industry consumers, only in this particular space. And it's time to stop these companies from harassing and overcharging our constituents once and for all. Thank you so much for listening, of course, extending me some time. I look forward to turning it over to Liz, who is on virtually, for some short remarks, as well as Melissa. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you. We'll hold all the questions until all three.
Absolutely, sounds great. There she is.
Hello, sorry. It feels very strange to be zooming in. Hello, everyone. Okay, I'll just go right into my testimony. Thank you. Good morning. My name is Liz Anderson, and I'm the Chief of the Energy and Telecommunications Division for Attorney General Andrea Campbell. First, let me say thank you to Chair Roy and members of the committee for hearing our testimony today. You heard from the AG about why we think it is so critical to pass this legislation to do away with the individual residential electric supply market. You have likely heard or will hear from others about why it is so important to keep this part of the market. For example, in the past few years, you've heard that we should give customers a choice for their electricity supply. But choice is not a benefit when all the choices are bad, because consumers almost always end up losing money. You've also heard that this market is important to give customers an opportunity to purchase renewable energy products. Sometimes suppliers even claim this can help Massachusetts reach its clean energy goals. But we know that suppliers often purchase cheap renewable energy certificates, or RECs, from outside the New England region. This means that, one, the premium the customer is paying for the renewable energy product is probably too high. And two, the customer is not actually helping Massachusetts reach its clean energy goals. Most recently, you've heard that this market provided savings for customers last winter when basic service rates spiked to all-time highs following the war in Ukraine. But that spike in basic service rates was short-lived, and the rates this winter will be significantly lower. We expect any savings experienced by customers to be similarly short-lived, and we think it is reasonable to expect those savings to be small in comparison to the massive losses experienced in the 7 prior years of data that we have. Finally, you've heard that this market can thrive if we just put a few more guardrails around it. First, we've seen other states attempt to change this market from one that harms customers to one that benefits customers by adding more regulations and oversight. I've yet to see any state where this effort has been successful. Second, many of the additional regulations supported by the suppliers today already exist in Massachusetts and have not helped transform the market into one that benefits customers. We believe the supplier industry cannot be reformed because it completely lacks accountability and transparency, and these flaws are not addressed by any alternative proposal you may hear about today. For example, any additional oversight authority for the DPU is meaningless if suppliers continue to fight tooth and nail against any and every allegation of wrongdoing, rather than accepting responsibility and working to address the problem. Another example, suppliers protect most of their information as competitively sensitive so that the public does not have access to it. In particular, suppliers do not want the public to know all of the rates they actually charge to their customers. They would prefer to keep rates only to those introductory rates that you see on the DPU shopping website. Thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you. We're going to hold the questions until all three of you have testified, so don't run away on us.
Thank you, Liz.
Thank you, Chair. The Supervisor Consumer Specialist for Attorney General's Consumer Advocacy and Response Division, and I lead the division's utilities team. Our team of consumer specialists work with consumers to resolve complaints against competitive electric supplies through a voluntary mediation process. We also work closely with Liz Anderson and the AG's energy team to advocate on behalf of consumers. Since 2016, my division has received over 700 complaints against competitive electric supplies. Consumers describe deceptive sales representation and being blindsided by unexpected rate increases. Consumers complain that they never receive a notice of a rate increase or that notice is misleading. Consumers tell us that when they file a complaint to their supplier, they either get the runaround or a flat denial of any relief. For example, an elderly consumer said that a salesperson pretended to be an Eversource employee, approached him in his yard, and offered to cut his energy bill in half. The salesperson carried a clipboard with what appeared to be Eversource documents attached. In fact, the documents were only an Eversource bill. It was a prop that the salesperson used as part of the deception. The consumer reported that they did not receive any of the savings the salesperson promised, and instead, their energy bills increased. A company salesperson also pretended to be working for a municipality, asking local residents for copies of electric bills and claiming they need to switch providers as part of a city program. Another consumer, a senior living in a subsidized housing, accrued a $3,000 balance after being misled by a competitive electric supplier. Yet, another consumer who did not read or speak English reported that a representative came to the door, used high-pressure sales tactics, and enticed them with a gift card to enroll. And yet, another circumstance, a consumer who relied on oxygen support faced thousands of dollars in bills and the possibility of her electricity being shut off. These are just a few examples of the misleading tactics that competitive electric suppliers have deployed to take advantage of Massachusetts residents. We fully support the legislation before you that would prohibit new competitive electric supply contracts for residential customers. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I
Thank
do
you,
have a few
Chairman.
questions. I'll start
Okay.
off and then I'll call on the panel who's here and then our folks
Perfect.
online. And I've heard it. Bad. First, tell me, believe there are any good players in this space?
I'll start, Chairman, and I'll turn it over to Liz to add some more color. So I think for any enforcement cases we take on for any issue, there are always going to be good players. And I think the same is true for this particular industry. But overall, when we look at the numbers of complaints that we receive, and we recognize that this over 700 complaints that we've received, that's scratching the surface. There are many constituents who don't know we exist, don't know of our enforcement role to even go after these folks to help them. So we really think those numbers are underreported. In addition to that, when we did our analysis and looked at all of the savings that folks did not receive, just the losses, for us, we want to make sure that as we are crafting a solution to really not only enforce our laws, but to make sure that consumers don't continue to be harmed, this was the only outcome. Because the deceptive behavior we're seeing by, we would say, the majority of folks in the industry, the misleading information around savings, the representation that they work for National Grid or Eversource or municipality is so overwhelming that the few maybe good actors within the industry is not enough to actually protect everyone. And our goal is to make sure we're protecting all Massachusetts residents, while also, of course, helping folks come up with alternatives to realize savings, and then, of course, to reach our climate goals. And then the other piece I will stress, and I'll have Liz add on to this, our office only has so many resources and so much human capital to be able to prosecute the bad actors. And so we will continue to do that. We've done that in some instances. We're constantly looking at what are other solutions. In this legislative solution, everyone in the office, including my predecessor and those before, agree is the only solution to protect consumers going forward, while telling folks, get your act together, as you have done in the the commercial space or the industry-wide space. We're not taking away that particular part of their business or obviously the existing contracts they have with consumers. But going forward, this legislative solution we see as the only fix to what is a massive problem, and almost obviously at some point, if we do more numbers, could amount to $1 billion in losses. And then I'll have Liz just add some more color there. I don't see her.
Thank you, AG. And I'll just note that the sound is going in and out a lot, and I did not hear almost all of what Chairman Roy asked, but I will jump in based on what I heard you say, Attorney General, and just say that what we've seen is that people who do manage to save money in this market are very smart, savvy customers who have a lot of time and resources on their hands to manage their contracts to ensure that they secure actual savings. And that you can see in our report, we have demographic data that shows that customers in wealthier communities and wealthier zip codes tend to have less losses than customers in other zip codes in the rest of the state. And I would also add that you have the savings that these people are able to secure, if they do, are very small compared to the losses. Now, you could have savings, say, for example, you have an electricity rate of 22 cents for basic service, and you have savings because you signed up for a 17-cent contract. Well, the losses are people who are being charged 55 cents by a competitive supplier. Now, that loss between 22 and 55 is much larger than the savings between 17 and 22, for example. So that's some of what we've seen play out over the years.
And if I could just add one more point, Chairman Roy, because I think it is relevant. You think about the gaming industry, and we're in the weeds on making sure that we're creating a level and fair playing field as we promulgate new regulations, particularly for sports betting, et cetera. We recognize that all those businesses will say we're better than the other one. We're doing our part. They're not. And there, we're of course not suggesting that we wipe out a whole industry, because we're seeing folks step up and be transparent, for example, with us. We're seeing folks share information. We're seeing them come to the table to negotiate where there have been problems around, say, data questions or concerns. That's just not the case here. If anything, we're only hearing from the consumers on a regular basis about major consumer protection cases and issues that we have to address, hoping that this industry will step up, and it just hasn't. And so we don't take it lightly that we come with a drastic legislative solution and fix, but we don't want to get to a place where we see $1 billion in losses for consumers across the Commonwealth, and by that point, have more folks suffer.
Well, I can say emphatically, I share that goal of reducing the losses. I'm just struggling with whether the solution is putting an entire industry out of business. And I think of some of the potential benefits that we will see out there as we move into the advanced metering stage in homes, all of the competitive products that can be offered that will push the climate change goals that we have set forward by offering time of use rates, which I know that some of the competitive suppliers in other states are offering, and would love to see those types of offerings here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And I'm not sure that we're going to be able to do that unless we have an active industry. I too want to see those bad players knocked out of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And as I listen to you read the litany of horrific business practices that you outlined, I'm sitting here saying, how is it that these people are still doing business in Massachusetts? How is it that they haven't paid exorbitant fines? How is it that they haven't paid double or triple damages under our Consumer Protection Act? And I think I know the answer. And that is that they go out of business and you can't chase them because they don't have any assets left. And I looked at Chair Chan's bill, where number one, he wants to increase penalties, increase license fees, make bonding requirements so that these issues can be appropriately addressed and these folks can be held accountable. I would love to hear your thoughts about other things that we could do with Chair Chan's bill to make this industry work appropriately, keep it intact,
Mhm.
and give it a shot. Is there something you can share with us that would
Mhm.
make his bill stronger and allow us to continue with
Mhm.
competitive supply?
So of course we've reviewed Rep. Chan's bill and other ideas, right? That may not be in a legislative form. And no, because we adamantly believe that if the additional regulations, even an increasing of fines, whatever it is not going to change the behavior of this industry and is not going to suddenly put us on track to get these consumers the savings they're promised.
But what is the basis for that
Because of
suggestion that it will not
Mhm.
curtail these bad practices?
Because they're not doing it now. We actually think we have adequate regulations in place, as you just mentioned. All of those folks that we would want to go after to prosecute through civil enforcement, to have them pay those treble damages. If we had our whole office of nearly 700 people, or a little over 600 people, if fully staffed would be 700, focused just on this, we probably still wouldn't have enough human capital to do the investigations, which are time consuming and lengthy, to also the time, of course, to prosecute these cases. It takes time to go after a company that we see is not doing the right thing. And not all of them have gone out of business. That is maybe in some particular cases, but some are still operating and we're still maybe trying to go after them, but it's still very difficult. So the regulations we have in place are sound and they're good and they're progressive by many accounts. But what we're seeing is we can't actually keep up with the enforcement of or response to these complaints because we just don't have enough human capital. And the fact that it's
Are you
not
able
just
to collect your costs back, whatever your attorney's fees are recoverable in an action? Are you capable of getting that money back from these folks?
maybe in some instances, but it maybe in some instances, but it misses the point that we know there are bad actors right now operating in the Commonwealth that we don't have literally the human capital to go after, even though we know they are targeting consumers. We know they're reaping profits and not delivering on the savings they say they promise. And those benefits that you mentioned, we want those benefits and we want to reach our climate goals too. And for the last 25 years, and then frankly, the last 6 or 7 years that we've been tracking this data closely, they haven't delivered on those benefits. And we don't want to wait until we see more losses to then say, oh, we hope they can do it. At this point, we're beyond and past sort of the hoping phase. They're just not going to deliver. And I say that because we don't come in saying that lightly. It is a tough, it is tough to try to ask you to do this, right? But based on everything we've seen who they're targeting in particular, how they're doing it, the savings and the data we're tracking about the lack of savings and the losses that we're seeing for consumers, this full picture of deception, of misrepresentation, of consumer harm is so robust that the only fix is this legislative solution to say, sorry, industry, we gave you a chance and you blew it. And Liz can add some more color because from her team's perspective, they are prosecuting these crimes. They are prosecuting these incidents. They are also, of
I
course,
think
working
that
with
it
Melissa.
sounds like criminal activity to me.
Yeah,
So
they were also working with.
don't hold back from that.
They also are working with Melissa and her team on, of course, triaging the complaints and making sure we're being responsive to them. But I'll let her just share and what we've done in that space so far and just how hard it is and how painful it is to not be able to exercise the authority of the office to go after folks we know are seeking to prey on our consumers.
Thank you. Yes, so we
Liz,
Liz.
unfortunately, we can't hear you.
No?
Hopefully, there you are. Now you're
No, we
back.
can't.
Hi. Thank you. So I would just add to what the AG said that we have had, enforcement actions where we spent more than 5 years pursuing a supplier that ended in a settlement where we got almost $10 million, but that was only about a third of what we alleged were the losses for those customers. And that required us to litigate in Superior Court and also at the bankruptcy court in Delaware. So our team went down to Delaware several times to argue and litigate there, and we did win, but it was a long and very resource intensive experience. I will also mention, when you're talking about the bond, like the bond having, I think it's a $10 million bond and how that will help. We had another supplier that we spent about 5 years investigating, and we alleged that we had at least $24 million in losses from that supplier. That supplier filed for bankruptcy before we could come to any agreement on a settlement, and we had to file a claim in bankruptcy court for that money. We will not see that money. We're never going to see that money. We did, however, secure some money for DEP and for DOER for the compliance payments that they had to pay for their RPS obligations. But that's just an example of, even if they had a $10 million bond, that wouldn't even cover half of the losses that we saw inflicted upon their customers. $10 million in energy terms is not a lot of money. There is these suppliers bill tens of millions of dollars every month. So if they leave the Commonwealth and do not have any assets here, we need to be able to secure full restitution. We're looking at tens of millions of dollars, not just $10 million. So I don't think that just makes a dent. And I think that's a problem with a lot of the things in the alternative bill, is that they make a dent, but they really don't go the full way to making sure that customers are protected.
The other piece that I just asked you to comment on is the formation of the Office of Retail Market Oversight that's contemplated in the Chair Chan bill. Do you think that will be a tool that would help in the enforcement of these measures?
I'll have Liz continue. I know time is of the essence, but Liz, I'll have you continue on that point too.
Sure. So that piece of the bill, can you all hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. A lot of it already exists in the sense that like the investigation authority and the ability to recommend suppliers have their license either revoked or suspended. The DPU has already laid out a process for that in the docket number 16-156 that already exists. They've already issued notices of probable violation to a couple of suppliers. I will note that those proceedings took multiple years to investigate and bring to a final order. And actually, one of them is still awaiting a final order. So it is not a quick fix. The suppliers, as I mentioned in my testimony, fight tooth and nail about any and all allegations of wrongdoing. So trying to go after a supplier for allegations of wrongdoing is very time intensive, resource intensive, and typically takes several years.
My final question, and I'll turn it over to my colleagues. The final question is, I've heard from many customers who like having this choice and have indicated that they've gotten savings from the program. What do we say to those folks who want this and like this? We're going to take away that opportunity. How do we best answer them?
No, but Liz, go ahead, and then I'll wrap up. Yeah.
I mean, as I said, I think earlier, the savings that people experience are relatively small in comparison to the massive, huge losses. So we're basically thinking about, do we keep this market open so that some people can sometimes experience a little savings? So in return, a lot of their fellow residents end up paying hundreds of more dollars per year on their utility bills than they need to. I mean, it's a really serious concern. So I would also say that we have a lot of municipal aggregations in the Commonwealth now. There are going to be more in the coming months and years. And those municipal aggregations offer, options for a lot of residential customers. And the more municipal aggregations we see, I think the more choices people will have in that regard.
And I'll just add, as we look to expand the Bureau, which Liz sits under, the Energy and Environment Bureau, and to bring on more attorneys and more staff who are focused on our climate goals, which we're actively doing, particularly at the bureauship level. We know it's direct some of our resources and human capital to those efforts, including expansion of municipal aggregation and the tools we know are actually working, and not on these time and resource intensive investigations and prosecutions of competitive electric supplies. We can reach our goals, and we can do it in partnership with the administration, with all of you and so many others, while still, of course, affording folks those savings. But the massive losses we're seeing for the majority of folks is too overwhelming for us to ignore to just protect a few. We can still work with those folks and still make sure they get savings, and may also at the same time do our part to make sure those other consumers, particularly those that are being targeted in our poorest communities, also receive savings too.
Thank you. Any questions from Rep. Haggerty?
So of the 700 complaints that you've received, are those broken down by company at this point, or are you guys allowed to leak that information? Because it would give us, I think, great insight into who these actors are, whether or not there are any good actors, and also obviously provide some public disclosure around who the bad actors actually are, that might give us some insight in decision making.
I'm not sure. Do we track?
Yeah, we can
Yeah.
see what the bad actors are.
But go ahead, Melissa, and I'll follow up. Okay.
Mhm.
And then I'll go back to Melissa. So we can share anything that we sort of track, right? Like I said earlier in my testimony, my only concern is while we can identify some of the bad actors, and we've obviously gone after some, the DPU is looking into some. My only concern is that even the number of complaints that we've received, we think are underreported, because the majority of folks, or the average resident in Massachusetts, they don't know who I am. They don't know Liz. They don't know Melissa. They don't know the AG's office. They don't have a clue what the office does. They have no idea what our responsibility as a ratepayer advocate. They don't have a clue. So they don't even know that when something goes wrong with the utility bill, where do I go? Where do I turn? They might come to you, or they might come to municipal leadership and then be directed to our office, but the vast majority don't. And so we are actually concerned that the number of potential bad actors out there aren't captured fully by the data we have, but the data we do have, we'll share with you anything we have, of course.
That'd be great. And
Yep.
also, I guess, even more specifically, some of the outcomes of those 700, which I think was helpful.
Will do.
Some of those outcomes you've already had, but whether or not, 500 or not solved, 200.
Will do.
How that lands. Thank you.
Thank you. Good to see you, Rep.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Rep. Owens?
Yeah,
Good to
and
see you,
just
Rep.
Follow up on Vice Chair Haggerty's question. If we could get a sense of the time scale, I mean, it averages out to be about 100 complaints a year, like 2016, you said. If we could get a sense of, are those complaints increasing, are they decreasing? If this is a problem, then it'll just solve itself as people, decide that these are. If a guy knocks on my door, it's fraud, just slam it, that sort of thing. Or is it a question of like, this is actually getting worse and worse as the fraudsters and the bad actors get more sophisticated? I think that would be very helpful for us to know.
We can absolutely share that. And we think it's actually getting worse and worse. And even some of the complaints, Melissa mentioned some stories. When you target certain communities of low-income residents or folks who don't speak English as a first language, or elders in particular, we just established the Elder Justice Unit. We're getting that off the ground. But the number one thing we're seeing for every type of scam, elders rise to the top in terms of who's being targeted. But what's worse is their response is, oh, I thought I was going to get a good thing. And so we're doing a lot of training to say, if it doesn't sound good, it probably isn't good, right? But even with that type of training, we see elders still signing up, still participating in a scam, still being duped, still being taken advantage of, which is really unfortunate. So even if we sort of give them all the training they would need, we don't know that they will by themselves, right, remove themselves from what we know is a scam, which is sad. But we can share all that information very soon. Thank you, Rep.
I'm sitting here thinking how you had made the comment that some of the consumers don't know who you are and what you do. And
What
it
the
was
office
struck
does.
me that somebody knocked on your door as a competitor. And I said,
And it was right before I knew I was going to be coming to the State House some months ago to testify on this piece of legislation. And I had seen it before, just coming from the City Council, I represented Dorchester, Mattapan, which are environmental justice neighborhoods in Boston. And those concerns, people are knocking on my door from a lot of elders. They won't go away. I'm actively on the phone with some constituents saying, well, can you put the person on the phone? They don't want your product, go away. And we don't want those folks calling 911 to have a public safety response to someone who is being very aggressive. And so fast forward, when I got that person knocking on my door, I couldn't believe it. So that's why I remarked.
You didn't buy.
Absolutely not. But, obviously in certain municipalities, you have aggregation in those municipalities is helping consumers. And obviously the leadership of our mayor in Boston, but other municipalities too, they're doing their part. But we know we can take a more aggressive stance on reaching our climate goals. And we are actively looking at what that looks like. But it would help if we could limit some of our reactive work and do more proactive work on some other issues related to climate and protecting our communities all across the Commonwealth.
I know that Representative Souza, who is online, has a question. So Rep. Souza, floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and thank you to the AG and her team for.
Unfortunately, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
There you go.
There we go. Thank you so much to the AG and her team for their testimony. It's compelling. I come from the solar industry, direct to sales, so I understand. And I wanted to present a question that I was actually just wondering if you had considered. A lot of these companies provide a vehicle to be able to work in sales in the energy industry. You don't need a degree. It really is, it's a tremendous amount of hard work to develop your sales. That has made it an incredible vehicle for young men and women of color to create generational wealth. And unfortunately, some of them do fall into these companies that are bad apples, and they have to kind of shift gears and find. However, doing away with an entire vehicle that I have seen firsthand lift entire families is extremely concerning to me. And being able to say nope, unfortunately, because another company was predatory to your industry, we're kind of clip you by your kneecaps, and this vehicle that you found for your family is no longer available. And I know that consideration whenever you talk about eliminating an entire industry. Mm-hmm. So I was wondering if that is something that has come to your consideration.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Representative. Yes, I think, one thing, it's not just me, I would say the team as well. We pride ourselves on always wanting to talk to those who have a different opinion or perspective. And before filing this legislation and refiling this legislation, sitting down with a wide range of stakeholders to hear their concerns and be very thoughtful. So when we came to this conclusion that the industry really needs to be revamped, and what I mean by that is we're not taking away some lines of businesses for these companies. We're taking away one particular market where the consumer losses are just too great. And this particular market of individual residential customers and the losses that we're seeing align with our number one priority as an office, which is to protect consumers. That is our number one mission in many ways. And even when we say prosecuting crimes, whether criminally or, of course, through civil enforcement, it is to protect consumers. And Massachusetts, we know, has the best and the most progressive consumer protection laws. And right now, even with those existing laws and with that mandate to protect consumers, we are unable to do that because of the practices of this particular industry. But we would hope that they would maybe shift some of those folks who are building wealth, as you just mentioned, which is also important to the office, to maybe some other parts of their business model, other parts of their customer outreach, to protect those jobs and to think about doing things differently. And then I will say one other part of the office that more to come on this as we develop our strategic plan is to work on closing the racial wealth gap. I even hired someone within the Executive Bureau for the first time ever, who would be my senior advisor on economic mobility and opportunity that has never existed in the AG's office, to look across the entire office on ways to close the racial wealth gap. No one industry is going to be able to do that, we know. And so we're going to think about how we do that, create more opportunities to close the racial wealth gap, but at the same time, continue to protect our consumers. So I hear you loud and clear, but the losses are too great. And that mandate requires us to do something quite aggressive.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rep, and good to see you.
Thank you, Rep. Souza. Any other questions from our folks online? I'm seeing none. I want to thank you for your testimony
Sure.
and look forward to working with you over the session to see if we can come up with a solution.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, of course, to the committee and everyone who's participating. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next witness is a panel, Frank Kaliver and Gretchen Fuhr. Did I pronounce your name right? Kaliva. All right. Is Gretchen, she's online. Okay, you're
Yeah.
on.
Good morning, thanks.
There you are. One thing I could ask you, if you would take those two microphones and put them together, I understand that there's an audio problem, so that's going to help us.
Is that all right? Good morning, Chair Roy, Vice Chair Haggerty, and members of the committee. My name is Frank Kaliva. I'm the national spokesperson for the Retail Energy Supply Association. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I'm here in support of Representative Chan's bill, House Bill 3155, as well as in respectful opposition to House Bill 3196 and Senate Bill 2106. There's 3 points I'd like to make today. Some of my colleagues are going to speak to the specifics of Representative Chan's bill, but at a broader level, I'd like to make 3 key points. The first is customers in Massachusetts and other places want choice. And we think the best evidence of that is the fact that 1.6 million residential customers chose a competitive supplier in the state last year. That's in line with a survey from 2021, which showed that 79% of Massachusetts residents valued having a choice other than the incumbent utility default service or basic service, as it's known in Massachusetts, which again is in line with what we see nationwide, with recent surveys showing up to 80% of consumers want customer choice. So we believe that customers clearly have expressed a preference and a desire to have a choice when it comes to their energy supply. The second point is that we believe choice does provide value to customers. That's clear in a number of ways. We heard earlier discussions about savings. Price savings do matter to many customers. We recognize that. And our own research shows, based on data from the DPU's Energy Switch MA website, that customers who are actively shopping in the month of August could have saved $42 million based on what was available, offers available on the Energy Switch MA website versus basic service. Again, that's customers actively shopping for a supplier. Price isn't the only factor, of course. There are customers who value a fixed rate product that provides price certainty over many months or even years. There are customers who do value renewable energy. And as we heard earlier, that includes both the minimum RPS requirements in Massachusetts, but additional products which can reach 100% renewable energy content. And as I like to say, Mother Nature doesn't respect political boundaries. And while we all want to see more investment in clean energy in Massachusetts, there are real benefits across state lines when you purchase a REC, which is a robust system of accounting for the environmental benefits of investment in renewable energy. Finally, we believe we need to reform the market to lead to its renewal. So we believe that there's no question that there are issues in the market, and we believe Representative Chan's bill, which my colleagues will talk about, will address those challenges. But we believe that this can lead to the renewal of the market and the availability of additional benefit to consumers. I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you so much. We'll wait for the other panelists, and then we'll take questions. So Gretchen, you next. Is it 2 of you on the panel? Or just the 2? Okay.
Yes. Good morning, Chairman Roy, members of the committee. Thank you for your time today. My name is Gretchen Fuhr. I am the Director of State and Wholesale Market Policy for Constellation Energy, and I also serve as the President of RESA, the Retail Energy Supply Association. And I am here with Frank today to voice my support for House Bill 3155. So Constellation considers itself one of the good apples. We are a Fortune 200
I hope
company.
so.
We're the #1 producer of carbon-free energy in the United States. We produce about 10% of the nation's clean energy. We're also a competitive energy company. We provide power, natural gas, renewables, energy management products and services to both residential customers all the way up to large industrial, and we serve municipal aggregations as well. We are committed to best-in-class service, consumer protections, but we also understand the concerns that have been voiced here today. We want to be responsive to what we've heard. And so with that, I wanted to highlight some of the bill's provisions that I think really get to the heart of the concerns expressed by the Attorney General's office today. And starting with low-income customers, this bill would prohibit new enrollments of low-income customers, as well as renewals of low-income customers right away. So that's full stop, preventing new or renewals of low-income customers. However, it would require the DPU to look into the establishment of a competitive procurement process for low-income customers. So you can think of that akin to municipal aggregations, so that low-income customers are not stranded on default service, but have the opportunity to take advantage of the competitive supply, receive the corresponding benefits, but all through a process overseen by the DPU. And then as far as consumer protections more broadly for the entire residential market, the bill would prohibit any type of cancellation fee. And so that allows customers to move back and forth between products and services without fear of having to pay a fee in order to switch. Further, addressing language barriers or the inability to communicate in the language of the sales agent. This bill would require that marketing agents terminate any interaction with consumers if that individual is unable to understand or communicate in the language of the sales agent. And how that could be verified is that the bill would also require a third-party verification. So if a marketing agent was at the door and pitched something to the customer signs the contract would have to be verified over the phone by a third party to make sure that the consumer understands all the salient points and is able to proceed with the contract. I see that I'm at time here. There's a lot in this bill that I really do think gets to the heart of the concerns that we've heard. Including bonding fees, more transparency, posting of complaints, ranking of suppliers, reporting on the voluntary renewables that are purchased by suppliers to support their voluntary recs. So all of that is in there, and I'm happy to go into any detail or answer any questions from the committee.
Let me start with a few questions. One of the I suppose, actually, could you address some of the benefits that retail suppliers can offer consumers? I know that competitive rates is one of them, but what are some of the other things that are related to climate goals that retail suppliers offer that are currently not available in the market?
Sure, and I know some of my colleagues that have signed up to testify later are going to get into specific programs and pricing that they offer. But for Constellation, we offer things like time of use, as you mentioned, so consumers can charge their EVs at night when rates are low and take advantage of savings in that way. I would also say that Constellation does not promise savings for any of our products. What we offer is stability over time. So we offer long-term fixed price products, typically a year to 3 years. And I sort of think of that as, like a mortgage on your home. Not many people are floating variable rates on their mortgages. What they want is to understand what they're going to pay for and how much it's going to be month to month. And that's the value we offer in Massachusetts today. But going forward with AMI deployment, we can offer time of use. We can offer EV charging rates. We can do efficiency and demand management. In Texas, for example, we offer a product where consumers can tell us, I don't want to pay more than $100 a month on my total bill. And we can ping them as their usage is getting high throughout the month and send them push notifications that they've signed up for to say, you're approaching your monthly limit that you have set. Here's what you can do to reduce your usage over the month to meet your goal. So there are very interesting, flexible type products that we can offer with some billing enhancements and with AMI deployment.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Let me see if my colleagues have any follow-up questions. And anyone online? I'm seeing none. Well, thank you very much. And I think we will be hearing from some of your other colleagues during the hearing. So thank you
very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, at this time, I'll call Cece Doucette. And I also want to note that Representative Fernandez has joined us. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm Cece Doucette, the Director of Massachusetts for Safe Technology. And Chair Roy, you may know that Chair Golden advanced the smart meter no fee opt-out bill in 2020, and it was originally introduced by your former colleague, Rep. DiNatale. They knew Vermont already enacted a no fee opt-out law, so we know it can be done. It is critical we pass Senator Moore's 2152 with urgency for 3 reasons. One, the FCC misled us into thinking that smart meters are safe. They are not. The FCC has been sued for ignoring 11,000 pages of evidence of harm, but has failed to respond to the court order to bring public radiation exposure limits in line with the science. So we must address safety at the state and local level. 2, I have a packet for each of you that includes this graphic of the biological harm documented extensively in the scientific literature from wireless man-made radiation. It explains wireless radiation's role in causing so many children and adults to suffer today from insomnia, anxiety, depression, headaches, cognitive impairment, behavior issues, heart problems, and more. The first medical school textbook has now been released. 3, New Hampshire has surpassed Massachusetts. We have had bills for years, and in 7 months, they passed a law to investigate wireless radiation. They came out with this groundbreaking report that documents the conflicts of interest with the wireless industry, the FCC, and the FDA. They also recommend transitioning away from outdated wireless connections and simply hardwiring our technology, like smart meters, to and through the premises. They are far faster, more reliable, energy efficient, and sustainable, not to mention that our data and privacy are better protected when we're not using wireless technology. Reinventing wires can get us there. We know wireless harm is hard to get our minds around since, like COVID, it's invisible. But we can measure this electropollution with a detector. In this chamber, just from everybody's devices and the wireless infrastructure, we're already in the high ranges on this meter. I measured with this how many times a day my 2 utility meters pulse radiation at my family, 17,000 times a day. Senator Moore has put an emergency preamble on this bill. Please pass Senate 2152 with urgency. And Chair Roy, if we could amend your House 3220 relative to advanced metering infrastructure to require Eversource, National Grid, and the others to install hardwired connections with no radiating transmitters. Chattanooga, Tennessee has already done it. We don't even need to be the first, but we do need to demand safe technology in the Commonwealth. Thank you, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you so much. Any questions from the panel? Any questions from our folks online? Seeing none, I thank you, and you can leave the packets with Mr. Gay at the end of the table. Thank you very much. Our next witness is Michael Muadin.
Thank
I
you,
believe
Chair Roy.
Michael is online. Michael,
Thank
are
you,
you
Chair
up?
Roy.
There you are. Okay.
Thank you, Chair Roy, for the privilege of testifying today. Honorable legislators, my name is Michael Muadin. As president of the Alliance for Microwave Radiation Accountability, I've encountered many of the millions of people across the United States who've been disabled by severe chronic electromagnetic sensitivity, a sickness studied and documented for 70 years as classic microwave radiation syndrome. I'm here to support Bill 2152, which protects human health by granting people who are sickened and disabled by microwave radiation the right to opt out of a smart meter and the right to choose an analog meter. This bill protects public health because any additional exposure to radiation devastates those with microwave syndrome and the EMS disabled. Further irradiation crashes their immune system, devastates their mental health, destroys the rest of their physical health, and finally ends their lives. The victims grow old, fast, and die. That's why the military called microwave radiation sickness rapid aging syndrome when it was first detected in radar operators decades ago. In other states, people with microwave syndrome and the EMS disabled lack the protection provided by a smart meter opt-out combined with the right to an analog meter. Those in Virginia who must refuse a smart meter due to radiation sickness and disability have had their power cut off by the local utility and have been left without electricity even in the winter. The energy bill of the United Kingdom was just rushed through the House of Commons with only 9 dissenting votes. It is in the final stage of passage before royal assent. Buried deep inside the 446 pages of dense legalese is a provision which allows representatives of energy companies to bring police protection and use reasonable force to enter any homes or premises to install a smart meter. The utility companies of the UK are being given a license to kill the victims of microwave syndrome and the EMS disabled. It must not happen here. Honorable legislators, it takes a certain fearlessness to turn the tide of events and shape the course of human history. We urge you to have the courage to pass Bill 2152. Protect human health and freedom. Lead the world by your example. Thank you for your time and your kind attention to my testimony.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Are there any questions? Any questions from our friends online? Seeing none, I thank you for your testimony. And our next witness to testify is Stephen Drury. Stephen, are you with us? We will move on to the next witness is Janet Fitzgerald. Janet, are you with us? Janet Fitzgerald?
Yes, thank you. Be right.
Okay.
Okay. Just wanted to move my camera. All right. First of all, I want to thank you very much for your time. And as you can hear from the other speakers who just spoke about 2152 supporting it, is that we have a lot of science behind us, the real science. And this is from researchers, doctors, engineers from all around the world that have been concerned about the overexposure of radio frequency radiation. As you probably know, or I hope, that we're being inundated right now with radio frequency radiation. It comes from many sources, and some of those are, some we can't avoid and some we can avoid, and they include everything from our cell phones to wireless routers, wireless laptops, And so what we have worked on are ways to get around this overexposure. Some we can control and some we can't. So with smart meters, we're hoping our own homes can be a sanctuary, right? Maybe we can't avoid 5G, unfortunately, even though that too is dangerous. But in our own homes, we can have it. So I happen to be someone who is one of many thousands of people who are electro-hypersensitive. But actually, everyone is sensitive to radiation. They just don't know it until the symptoms increase to the point where they get sick, headaches, nausea, everything. And what this comes down to is business owners like myself and workers can no longer work at that time. And that means less tax dollars going to the state or other governments, or federal government. So we want to think about that factor too, if we're not protecting our own citizens. What I see this as, I think some of the challenges we have include time to investigate this and understanding who is telling the truth. And when we're faced with industry, we have to realize, well, they have a profit incentive. What's our incentive as we speak to real scientists, independent scientists? Our incentive is just to be healthy. So I see this as more of an industry wealth versus citizens' health. And as you've already heard from Mrs. Doucette, there are ways around this. There are alternatives. And I know that Massachusetts for Safe Technology would be very happy to take care of all of the, to help you organize all of the sources of scientific information and know which is real. Who can we trust? That takes time on your part, right? So I know that Massachusetts for Safe Tech can make it easier for you. She has collected all the resources from all around the world, scientists, doctors, engineers, lawyers, even politicians. She mentioned how New Hampshire has set up a commission, the state of New Hampshire, to study this. This is serious stuff. There are cancer connections. My own husband has a brain tumor right here where he put his cell phone, and no, the FCC didn't mention anything like this. Yes, not only were they sued, Harvard has a white paper.
Just going to ask you if you can, your time has run out, if you can conclude.
Yeah, that Harvard has a white paper proving that they are compromised. So we have to look at real science. So I beg you, please listen to the people who are suffering. It's our health on the line. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Are there any questions for this witness? Any online? Thank you very much. Our next witness is Jonathan Mirin. Jonathan, are you with us?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Thank you, Chair Roy and members of the committee. My name is Jonathan Mirin. I'm the co-director of a grassroots organization in Western Massachusetts called Hilltown Health. And I'm here to also speak in support of Senator Moore's S2152. I understand this is the fifth go around for this bill. And I understand that's not very unusual, but as we're getting closer and closer to the full deployment, I believe it's 2024 for Eversource, or rather for National Grid, in 2025 for Eversource, of the AMI metering infrastructure, time is running out for giving people a no-fee opt-out. I was gratified yesterday to hear Senator Barrett, Chair Barrett, as more and more people testified to their personal injuries or the injuries of their loved ones from this exposure. He would always say, well, you know, I'm in favor of a no-fee opt-out. I'm not completely sure about the science, but I am in favor of giving people the choice. I think he said when we have a new technology, it's not a requirement that every single individual adopt that new technology. Senator Barrett, fortunately, unlike myself, likely doesn't have an electrosensitive person in their home. My wife was injured by a high wireless exposure about 10 years ago. She's essentially been housebound for about 10 years since then. And, you know, her ability to work, as Ms. Fitzgerald was pointing out, has been really compromised, as well as her ability to take care of our son, who was about a year old when she was injured. So Vermont has passed a no-fee opt-out. It's been done before. As Ms. Doucette pointed out, Chattanooga, Tennessee has actually figured out how to have this advanced metering infrastructure completely wired. So it is doable. there's an important social justice aspect here. People like yourselves who are middle class or upper middle class and have the time and the wherewithal to look at the research and make decisions about their exposure and about this environmental health threat. That's a certain luxury. Many people in our Commonwealth don't have that luxury. They're living in multi-family dwellings where you might have a full bank of meters just on the other side of a wall from children who are a child's bedroom. So you can imagine this is happened in state after state as these AMI meters are all swapped out with no notice to the residents. Suddenly, you have people who can't sleep, people who, children who are essentially being harmed, and there's been no warning. So, thank you for your time, and please consider S2152, put it out of committee, and let's get this done. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Are there any questions for this witness? Seeing none, I'll call our next witness is Karen Pavaza Spencer. Karen?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. My name is Karen Spencer. I currently live in Leominster, and I'm testifying in support of S2152 relevant to protecting consumers from coercive utility processes for smart meter use. I'm a senior citizen who has experienced heart palpitations, insomnia, and even nosebleeds when close to smart meters. It took me a while to figure it out, but my heart palpitations, verified by a Holter monitor, immediately ended when I removed the smart meter from the side of my house, which was installed by my city water department, and my sleep improved. Several months later, I got a sudden nosebleed when sitting in the chair on the other side of the wall from my utility meters. I immediately went outside and saw the smart meter had been reinstalled, apparently about 10 days earlier. I had it removed that day and never had another nosebleed. Sadly, I had to leave that house, which had been my home for 44 years, because I could no longer afford to live in the house or the community. My new house isn't as quiet, electronically speaking, as my old house, but it was the best I could do. I don't sleep as well, but my heart has been fine. That said, I live in fear of increasing electronic noise in my environment and my limited abilities to protect myself. Please allow no-cost opt-out for all smart meters and take action to limit or even roll back the existing wireless expansion. I am a former technology worker and appreciate the benefits of technology, but hardwiring devices and even forwarding calls from cell phones to corded house phones is safer than bombarding our bodies and bones 24/7 with all sorts of electronic, magnetic, and radio frequencies. Allow me to conclude with a quote from the 2019 EMF Scientists' Appeal to the UN, Human Rights Advisory Committee. Wireless communication technologies are rapidly becoming an integral part of every economic sector, but there is a rapidly growing body of scientific evidence of harm to people, plants, animals, and microbes caused by exposure to these technologies. It is our opinion that adverse health consequences of chronic and involuntary exposure of people to non-ionizing electromagnetic field sources are being ignored by national and international health organizations, despite our repeated inquiries, as well as inquiries made by many other concerned scientists, medical doctors, and advocates. This constitutes a clear violation of human rights as defined by the United Nations. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Are there any questions for the witness? Seeing none, I'll call our next witness is Helen Walker. Helen, are you with us?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much for the opportunity to testify before your committee. I'm representing the Massachusetts Association for the Chemically Injured. I'm supporting S2152. Macy has been coming before this committee to advocate for smart meter choice since 2013. One reason Macy supports this bill is that a number of our members and contacts developed debilitating ongoing health problems immediately after installation of wireless utility meters on their homes. In some cases, as you just heard, symptoms were so severe that people moved out of their homes. Some people became unable to tolerate a normal work environment because they developed sensitivity to ambient wireless radiation. This year brings special urgency. Under DPU Order 2180-82B, National Grid will begin mass deployment of AMI meters in 2024, Eversource in 2025. The opt-out needs to be in place before the deployment. Those ratepayers who will be surprised by sudden onset of health problems will need immediate remedy before those health problems turn into disability. The opt-out offered by DPU 2069A and utilities is not enough. It is wireless, not smart, that causes the health problems. The opt-out must be a non-wireless transmitting meter. As Cece mentioned, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit handed the FCC a major defeat in 2021. The agency had quietly closed its investigation into the adequacy of 1996 guidelines for wireless safety. Oral arguments showed that the FCC had no studies whatsoever about wireless technologies developed after 1996, or about exposures from combinations of technology, or about cumulative effects over time. The court was absolutely shocked. The court found the FCC's decision arbitrary and capricious in its failure to respond to thousands of pages of evidence of harm. The court remanded the guidelines to the FCC. Since the agency still has not reopened its investigation, the 1996 guidelines cannot be relied on to ensure the safety of smart meters. Consider the special hazard from large banks of wireless meters in multifamily housing. More meters mean higher emissions, sometimes above the level of those already inadequate FCC guidelines. In my Cambridge condo building, below my kitchen, are 18 electric meters. 16 are analog now, but 2 are wireless AMR. The owner of the unit with the 18 meters is electrically sensitive. She experiences brain fog, similar to long COVID, around wireless meters. She recovers by staying with friends frequently. What will happen to her when that entire bank of 18 meters has become AMI meters? As Jonathan said, this is a social justice issue, since large banks of meters are common in multifamily housing in our denser cities.
Helen, your time has expired. If you could conclude.
Just please report S2152 out of committee favorably and soon, and thank you for hearing my testimony.
Thank you so much. Are there any questions for the witness? Seeing none, we'll move on to Mana Washio. Mana, are you with us?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, indeed.
Thank you so much for having me to testify today. My name is Mana Washio, and I live in Barrington, New Hampshire. I lived in Massachusetts and Rhode Island before moving to New Hampshire. I became EHS in 2013 when my husband and I lived in Watertown, Massachusetts. While we were on vacation, NSTAR at the time came and installed a bank of infamous smart meters. Our bedroom was surrounded by them, and there were also 2 circuit breaker panels underneath our bedroom because we lived on the first floor. We also had a Wi-Fi router in our bedroom without knowing its harm. Immediately after the smart meter installation, I started having piercing headaches as if someone was inserting an ice pick into my brain. It was so bad I could not sleep at all. I also developed all sorts of GI issues, heart palpitation, chest pain, concentration difficulties, and so on. My symptoms subsided when I went away from my home, and it became worse when I came home. I also felt very strong pain standing right in front of the smart meters outside, so I knew what was causing the problem. EHS diagnosis was extremely difficult to attain because there are very few doctors who could diagnose. I was only able to get one in 2022 after moving to Rhode Island. I was a performing musician for many years, but large concert venues where people gather with their cell phones became the hardest place to work. I was forced to completely switch my career, and now I work from home as a health coach and a Reiki practitioner. Although I love my current job, I had to start all over and had completely different training before I was able to start making decent salary. In July 2023, I took the National Board exam for health and wellness coaching. 3 years ago in 2020, I actually took the same exam, but miserably failed due to the severe short-term memory and vision issues I developed due to the high EMF exposure at the test site. Even though I had requested, I was not given any accommodations I needed. So I forced myself to go into the test center. This year, I submitted the accommodation request again, along with the formal EHS diagnosis from MD and 2 supporting letters. I also explained what happened to me 3 years ago, but they did not give me the necessary accommodations right away. My accommodation request was only granted after I wrote the 3rd letter to them, quoting directly from the Department of Justice website under the exams and courses section for people with disability. After the approval, I was finally able to bring in a few EMF shielding materials. Thankfully, my short-term memory and vision were intact this time, and I passed the exam. I hope my experience will open up the opportunity for other EHS people to take the exam with necessary accommodations. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak today.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your testimony. Are there any questions for the witness? Seeing none, I thank you. And I see that Representative Blais has joined us, so we will go back to our panel with Kyle Murray and Representative Blais.
Mr. Chair, thank you. Can you hear me?
Absolutely, and can see you.
It's good to see you. Thank you for having me and for taking me out of order. I am here today to testify in support of H755, an act reforming energy system planning for equity and climate transformation, otherwise known as the RESPECT Bill. Last session, the legislature advanced transformative legislation to address the climate emergency. The provisions signed into law around solar, grid modernization, electrification, the expansion of wind power, and so much more will help the Commonwealth to meet our clean energy goals. I'm extremely grateful for your leadership and that of the speaker in advancing not 1, but 2 major climate bills last session. And I want to recognize the leadership of the Acadia Center, who was an instrumental partner in advancing the grid modernization bill last session. I'm grateful to be here today with Kyle Murray, the senior advocate and Massachusetts program director at the Acadia Center, who has helped bring this legislation forward. Mr. Chair, in the face of dire predictions of the impact of climate change, the Commonwealth must commit to re-examining and reimagining the regulatory framework as it pertains to the intricate relationships between the gas and electric utility systems, the interdependence between gas and electric demand, and the current laws that separately regulate them by state public utility commissions. A coordinated effort is required to better align planning with climate equity and clean energy goals and requirements, while also reducing costs for consumers. I think it's telling that the comments that gas local distribution companies provided in response to the DPU's investigation into the role of gas local distribution companies as the Commonwealth achieves its target 2050 goals, stated that the court, and I quote, "Coordinated planning is a complicated task and not traditionally undertaken by the LDCs. This legislation assists utilities in this clean energy transition as they face the near impossible task of making planning and investment decisions that must work in support of consumers, state policy, and the utility itself." In that response, the LDCs further argued that, and I quote, "It is appropriate for utilities to develop their own investment plans, which address their system's specific needs, demonstrate compliance with all federal and state regulatory and statutory requirements, and align with financial and corporate goals. Their measured and reasonable approach doesn't necessarily meet our goals. It meets their goals and the goals of their shareholders. And the result are it's poor outcomes for consumers. It's poor outcomes for climate goals and clean energy investments. It's delayed relief of environmental justice burdens and conflicts of interest that preserve the use of fossil fuels and slow the pace of building our clean energy future. Mr. Chair, this legislation is bold in its goal of reimagining the traditional regulatory framework for how utilities make investments and decisions. But this body has been bold before when it comes to addressing climate change and meeting our climate goals. As this bill is being filed for the first time, we stand ready to work with the committee to further refine it. And I thank you sincerely for your consideration of my testimony and this legislation. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you so much, and I'm also excited to hear about electric vehicles when you get back from your tour there.
I have a lot to share.
Excellent. Kyle?
Chair Roy, honorable members of the committee. My name is Kyle Murray, and I'm the Massachusetts Program Director for Acadia Center. Acadia Center is a nonprofit research and advocacy organization that works to advance bold, effective, and equitable clean energy solutions. We have a long history of advocacy for creating a fully integrated, flexible, and low-carbon energy grid. I'm here today to testify in support of H755 and S2091, an act reforming energy system planning for equity and climate transformation, which is a mouthful, and that's why we refer to it just as RESPECT usually, filed by Representative and Senator Comerford respectively. So RESPECT proposes a modernized framework for how utilities make investment decisions to ensure that investments in our energy system are aligned with state goals to address climate pollution, further environmental justice, and lower consumer costs. RESPECT reforms are needed because utility planning today faces three key problems. Utility planning is siloed between electric and gas utilities, which causes overspending, reduced reliability and resilience, and more climate pollution. Current planning processes ignore equity and environmental justice, and utilities have a financial interest in the outcomes of their planning decisions, creating significant conflicts of interest. RESPECT proposes a new framework for how the electric grid and gas network should be planned that will help ensure our energy systems meet state goals to reduce climate pollution, further environmental justice, and lower consumer costs. First, states should conduct all-in independent system planning that incorporates meaningful stakeholder input, including voices that have been ignored to date. Comprehensive planning should consider supply and demand side resources, as well as climate requirements and environmental justice impacts. Second, states should create neutral statewide planning entities that are designed to look for solutions beyond utility boundaries and across fuels, leaving traditional utilities free to focus their efforts on business development in alignment with climate and equity mandates. To accomplish these goals, this legislation creates a new Department of Energy Transformation Planning under the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs. This legislation would task this new department with developing and implementing long-term distribution system plans to assist in the transition to a clean, affordable, and reliable electric grid and restructured natural gas distribution system in a cost-effective manner. They would also conduct this long-term planning while ensuring a transparent process, which will help ensure that planning is done in the best interest of ratepayers and the Commonwealth's greenhouse gas reduction goals. It is clear that our current approach is simply not working, and additional resources, programs, and ideas are necessary for economy-wide decarbonization. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for the witness? Seeing none, I thank you both for your testimony.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Our next witness is Reverend Mariama White Hammond. Reverend, are you with us?
I am.
There you are. Excellent. Good to see you.
Thank you. I'm joining you from Thompson's Island and glad to be with you this morning. I want to offer testimony on behalf of Mayor Wu. Can you hear me?
Yes, indeed.
Okay, good.
Well, we're all thinking how we would like to be out there on Thompson Island with you is
Yes,
what
it is
going through our
really
minds.
beautiful.
Yeah, I can see.
So I want to express support for S2106 and H3196, bills that would protect our residents from predatory competitive electric suppliers. Growing up, my father often used a quote from Maya Angelou: "When someone tells you who they are, believe them." And we believe that we've seen over the years that competitive electric supply programs are predatory and have been documented results in hundreds of millions of dollars of extra costs that are disproportionately borne by low-income residents and communities of color. I know that you've heard from many different perspectives, including the AG, who has been a leader in really documenting all of the challenges that we see. But I would like to say that in Boston, we have seen residents paying as much as 60 cents a kilowatt hour. For the average resident, that is nearly $300 lost in 1 month compared to the basic community choice electricity service that the city offers. And this is not an isolated example. I am not speaking just as someone who has seen this in my role as an official, but someone who grew up in and now lives in a neighborhood that is targeted consistently by competitive electric supply sellers. And so I want to just highlight that we are asking really and urging the legislature to focus on 3 things. First, to prohibit competitive electric suppliers from entering new contracts with individual residential customers starting in January 1st of 2024. I have heard from folks before the desire to see things reformed, and we can have that conversation. But right now, it is literally the wild, wild west out there, and it is directly impacting many of our residents who are already experiencing many other challenges related to the kinds of inflation pressures we are seeing around the country. Second, we would like to prohibit competitive electric suppliers from renewing existing contracts with individual residential customers. This would allow consumers to default back to basic utility or municipal aggregation programs at the end of their contracts. And finally, we urge you to direct the Department of Energy Resources and the Department of Public Utilities to expedite the review of municipal applications for electricity aggregation programs and offer initiatives to provide lower emitting and or lower cost services to residents. I think in some instances, what you've heard is the competitive electric suppliers saying that they're offering options to people that they could not otherwise get. But in some instances, you have municipalities attempting to do the same thing, but are unable to do so because their applications languish in the DPU for months and years longer than is necessary. We do want to urge that there is still a role for competitive electric suppliers to contract with non-residential customers. We do work with some of them and believe that the market that is available for commercial interests makes sense to leave intact. But again, we have enough evidence to show the disproportionate impact and the deep harm. It does not align with the original intention of the legislation, and we believe the time is now to act definitively to protect Massachusetts residents and specifically low-income, elderly, and residents of color from the impacts of these predatory companies.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I do see that Representative Souza has a question. Representative Souza.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the testimony. I just have one quick question because based on my background, you mentioned kilowatt rates, and that's something that I'm vocationally attracted to, and I still track among my constituents here in Framingham, Massachusetts today. So has there been a comparison on kilowatt rates for people that have chosen a competitive supplier and standard rate? Because in my district, I am seeing traditional utility company consumers paying, the lowest I've seen so far is 48 cents, but it is climbing up there to about 60 cents. I've even seen about 73 cents per kilowatt, which keeps me up at night. But so I was wondering what the comparison has been as far as customers.
Sure. I mean, what we've seen in Boston is obviously, like everyone, we saw the spikes that happened shortly after the war in Ukraine started. There were not lots of different things. Obviously, we know what happens when winter and summer rates shift. 60 cents a kilowatt hour is one of the highest rates we've seen so far. We have seen them vacillate intensely. However, we have consistently seen the competitive electric supply rates be higher than our basic rates. We're in the Eversource territory, and our competitive electric rates our aggregation rates always, since the beginning, have beat both basic service as well as the competitive electric suppliers. So we have instances where we're able to offer folks our basic rate for Boston's aggregation is 11 cents a kilowatt hour. So it's ungodly to have people spending 60 cents a kilowatt hour when they could have something that only charges them 11 cents a kilowatt hour. I think the key piece is with aggregations, I'm not here to make money. We're here to make sure that our residents get the best rate that they can get with as much clean energy as possible. We are exceeding the RPS standard. So I think the key is what we have seen is a consistent trend. Even when rates went up on our basic, they were still usually lower than the competitive electric supplier. There are a few people, a very small number of people out there who can figure out how to manage these. The person that runs our energy team, he's able to do competitive electric suppliers and figure out how to manage that. But he's a lawyer who spends all day watching the energy market. That is not our average resident. And so I think we haven't, again, our basic rate has gone higher, but it's never gone higher than the average rates that we're hearing from the competitive electric suppliers.
Mr. Chair, can I ask one follow-up question?
Yeah, absolutely.
So just, so my concern is that if I understood what you're saying correctly, you're shifting the responsibility to where and maybe shifting the responsibility isn't quite the right expression, but leaving residents at the mercy of their municipal governments to enter into these municipal aggregation agreements.
No, I'm saying what we've seen is the basic rate offered by our utility is still lower than the competitive electric supply. But what I am saying, at least that's what we've seen in Boston. I can certainly look at what you're experiencing in Framingham. You might have a different setup, but we track frequently. What are the competitive electric suppliers offering? What is Eversource offering? And what is our rate? What is frustrating to me is there's been little to no action to regulate competitive electric suppliers. Little to no action. Small slaps on the wrist, minor fines, looking the other way. But then you have municipalities who are entering with aggregation opportunities that would lower costs for people, and they get caught in years and years of red tape. And I'm sort of asking whose interests are being served. At the end of the day, I have yet to hear not a single example, and if there is, feel free to inform me, of a municipal aggregation whose costs are higher than the competitive electric supplier. And so I'm just saying, where are our priorities? If you have an option that is consistently giving people a good price, why are they languishing and getting caught up in red tape while people who have a demonstrated record of stealing from consumers are allowed to continue doing so?
Thank you so much for clarifying. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you for your questions. Any other questions for the witness? Seeing none, I thank you for your testimony, and I hope the rest of the day goes as beautifully as it appears over there.
Thank you.
Our next witness to testify is Paul Hibbard. Paul, are you with us? Paul, one more time. Paul Hibbard. Then we will move on to Jennifer Bosco. Jennifer, are you with us? There you are.
In favor of House 3196, that is supply bill. My name is Jennifer Bosco. I'm a senior attorney at the National Consumer Law Center, and we're a Boston-based nonprofit organization that advocates for economic justice and financial fairness for low-income consumers, including utility consumers.
You might want to bring those two microphones in front of you.
Like this?
Thank you so much. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. So the National Consumer Law Center strongly supports House 3196 because individual residential sales of competitive supply have proven to be bad for consumers, bad for the climate. And as a national organization, we've worked on this issue in a number of states, the other restructured states besides just Massachusetts, and the problems that consumers face are remarkably similar. high prices that worsen the energy affordability and energy burden problems for low-income consumers, deceptive marketing tactics, particularly aimed at vulnerable consumers, and the deceptive marketing of green or so-called green products that overpromise the benefits of those products. Every state that has analyzed data has reached similar conclusions, every restructured state, that consumers are paying inflated prices overall in the aggregate, and that there have been no real benefits for consumers in this market. I also just quickly want to make a note about the complaints that the Attorney General's office had mentioned. NCLC had done some research a while back and filed a public records request with the DPU, and there were even more complaints that the DPU receives on an annual basis. There are also complaints received by local police departments. I think if you were to add up all the different sources of complaints from consumers, you'd have a lot. NCLC also supports an end to individual retail sales of competitive supply, because when other states have attempted partial consumer protection measures, such as some of the ones discussed earlier, the advocates in those states report that there are continued abuses, continued problems, even where low-income customers are supposedly protected or shielded. The market impedes our progress toward our climate goals, and that's another concern. More expensive electricity is a disincentive to consumers who are thinking about electrifying. Overstated claims of environmental benefits of so-called green products could deter more effective climate action. We don't need competitive supply to have time of use rates in Massachusetts, and those are being developed by utility companies. They're offered by utility companies around the country. So competitive supply is not necessary for time of use rates. So I urge you to pass House 3196. Glad to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Are there any questions for the witness? Representative Haggerty?
Yes.
Are you aware if the complaints that are made to the DPU are transferred over to the AG's office?
It's probably a better question for the AG's office. I know that there is cooperation between those, between the two agencies. But yeah, they would know the details of how that works.
Great, thank you.
And Representative Owens.
Yeah, and just to, again, piggyback off the vice chair, those complaints to the police, are people calling the police because their electric rates are too high, or are they complaining that the salesman will leave them alone or get off their property? That's what
The second one, yes, Representative.
they're not entering into the competitive supply system at that point. This is just the aggressive sales tactics they're calling the police for.
Right. Yeah, we've heard of consumers needing to call the police. So yeah. And the complaints to DPU are probably more along the lines of, I didn't intend to switch, this happened involuntarily, or the price is too high, or it's not what I was promised, or that sort of thing. A lot of those complaints involved elders, unfortunately, from what I saw, sometimes people with dementia whose power supplier was switched multiple times within 1 year because they were preyed upon multiple times.
Any other questions? Seeing none, I thank you for your testimony. And our next witnesses are panel, John Hanger and Jennifer Spinozzi.
Shall I proceed?
Absolutely.
I think it's good afternoon or good morning, wherever we are at.
We are still in the morning.
All right.
And you might want to pull both of those mics.
Okay. Thank you for having me. My name is John Hanger. I'm actually a resident of Shrewsbury, Massachusetts. I'm a former legal service attorney for low-income families in Philadelphia, a former public advocate for utility consumers in Philadelphia, a former commissioner of the Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission, secretary of the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection, and a former secretary of policy for Governor Wolf.
Busy man.
Yeah. I oppose market closure, and I support market reform. I'm shocked when rules are not enforced. I've always, when I've had a public office, enforced rules. And I would expect that you would want your rules enforced. So if there's an enforcement problem, and it sounds like there is, that needs to be addressed by the officials that have that responsibility. I firmly believe, after my long experience, that the power of choice is the single most important consumer protection. And I'll give you a concrete example. Contrary to what you just heard by the preceding witness, in Pennsylvania today, in the city of Philadelphia, you can shop for electricity and either buy the default supply or a competitive supplier and save roughly 50% compared to what the rates were in real terms when restructuring began. They're below 9 cents a kilowatt hour, and they would be 16 cents a kilowatt hour had rates continued from the 1996 level to today on an inflation adjusted basis. So it saved 50%. I also support choice because it is very helpful to decarbonization. There is 51 gigawatts of capacity that have been built by companies and homeowners through power purchase agreements. 51 gigawatts of renewable energy, zero carbon energy. There's 27 gigawatts of solar on people's homes and businesses. The whole New England power system is roughly 30 gigawatts. So to say that markets don't help decarbonize, frankly, is just wrong. I would go even further and say it's nonsense. It is absolutely the time, given the problems with offshore wind procurement here, to unleash the retail customer. We need retail 2.0 in order to reach our decarbonization goals. It's time to allow customers and businesses to use their money to buy renewable power. And let's remember, default supply in Massachusetts is overwhelmingly coming from burning natural gas. So anybody comes up here and tells you everything is fine with decarbonization because we have default supply, doesn't know where that electricity is coming from. It is not fine. It is highly polluting in terms of carbon. So let's get serious about reforming these markets, enforcing rules, and let's unleash the retail customer so that Massachusetts doesn't need tax dollars to decarbonize, or even necessarily ratepayer dollars to decarbonize. We can have private investment from homeowners and businesses like myself. Unfortunately, I'm captured as a municipal utility customer in Shrewsbury, so I can't do it. Don't do to Massachusetts what is now done to me. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Grab the mics. There we go.
Good nearly afternoon, Chairman Roy, members of the
nearly after
committee. My name is Jennifer Spinosi. I don't have quite the distinguished career as Mr. Hanger here. I'm the General Counsel and Executive Vice President of Corporate Affairs at Clean Choice Energy. I'm here in opposition to H. Bill 3196 and in support of H. Bill 3155. Clean Choice Energy is a renewable energy company with a mission to transform the electricity market by making it easy for residential customers to switch to clean renewable energy. Our products are exclusively 100% renewable energy, and we proudly serve more than 30,000 residential customers in the Commonwealth today. Additionally, Clean Choice has a solar development portfolio of over 300 megawatts in various stages of development, and recently announced an additional investment of $100 million in capital to develop, acquire, own, and operate solar projects. We're actively pursuing the acquisition and development of new solar projects in New England to serve our Massachusetts customers. This activity will ultimately lead to hundreds of millions of dollars in economic development activity in the Commonwealth and the region, and investing in the development of new generation so that we can continue to offer our retail market customers access to renewable regional energy is core to our mission. I want to emphasize that a competitive, well-functioning, robust, restructured market sets the very foundation for delivering on that vision. There have been a lot of conversations earlier today about some sort of generalities about this market. I want to share with you a couple of market distinguishers for Clean Choice. As I said earlier, we only sell 100% renewable energy. So that's the product that our customers come to us for. Our renewable energy is already regionally sourced, and we do believe that this choice is helping the Commonwealth achieve its goals. The vast majority of the renewable energy that we procure today is from the same projects that are listed on the Department of DOER's qualified generation. And as I said earlier, our vision going forward is to build, own, and operate our own solar facilities and provide that vertical integration for our customers. Customer experience is a focus of our business. Our primary marketing channels are direct mail and our website. We make it easy for customers to switch to renewables at the times and places that are convenient to them, and we don't use high-pressure sales tactics. We also don't promise savings, and the promotions and special offers that we provide are consistent with our mission to fight renewable energy, to fight climate change. One of our most popular.
Just make my heart stop.
We'll be careful though. We'll be careful. One of our most popular promotions just a couple years ago was that when customers signed up with us, they got a free national parks pass for a year. So they got to take their family, on vacations to explore national parks, and we were really proud to bring that to market. I realize my time is short here. I do want to emphasize Clean Choice strongly believes there is still more work to do, and that's why we support Representative Delegate Chan's bill. We think in particular that establishing a new voluntary reporting requirement is key to allowing the Commonwealth to be able to track the impact of voluntary purchases that are already happening today. We also firmly believe that implementing accelerated switching is core to the customer experience. You may or may not know that today it takes 1 to 2 billing cycles for a customer's switch to be implemented. This creates a frustrating, confusing, and negative customer experience. Accelerated switching allows a customer to be moved from default service to the retailer of their choice within just a few business days. That's a practice that's been in place in Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Washington, D.C. for a number of years now, and it should be adopted in the Commonwealth. In closing, I just want to say Clean Choice is really proud to do business in Massachusetts. We want to be an active partner with the legislature and the DPU to continue it to improve the retail market.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Are there any questions for the witnesses? Fernandez.
Just curious, if it saves money, then why has it cost $500 million in the past 6 years to Mass residents?
So
both mics, yeah.
Yeah.
There you go.
So I assume that's a reference to the Attorney General's report?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the Attorney General's report, very frankly, ended in 2021. So it's not the last 6 years. If you looked at the last year, there would be a savings of $1 billion if everybody had switched to a competitive supplier, because the default price has been much higher recently than the competitive market. So that's the first point. It's not the last 6 years. The second point about it is, very frankly, the Attorney General's document compares apples and oranges. It says somebody like me, who when I was in Pennsylvania had a long-term renewable energy contract, maybe a 2-year wind contract, was being ripped off because I was paying more than the default service. But that was my choice, and I had a stable contract for 2 years. It's sort of like saying somebody who has a 30-year mortgage is being ripped off because they didn't have a variable rate short-term mortgage or a 15-year mortgage. You have to really look at the details of that, Representative, respectfully. It is not a fair representation of what has been happening in Massachusetts, and it's not a current representation.
Yeah, no, thank you. Then how do you deal with asymmetric information for people unlike us that don't know?
That's an absolutely critical question. So when I was commissioner of the Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission, when we did restructuring, we spent $25 million on consumer education, which has continued for the last 25 years. The state has a responsibility to educate. The Public Utility Commissions, I think, is the place to do that. And it has to be consistent. It has to be continuous. That's job one. Job two is the rules that you have to be enforced. my understanding is not one license has been taken away from a competitive supplier in Pennsylvania, in Massachusetts. Not one. Yet I hear all these horror stories, and they are horrible stories. But where's the enforcement? You have to enforce the rules you have. 100% agree. The next thing is you actually need to put in place procedures and practices, like was just mentioned, that facilitate consumers moving. If you have to wait 1 or 2 billing cycles to get out of a bad deal into a better deal, that's not a good situation. It takes 3 days in Pennsylvania. You know, I know Massachusetts is actually smarter than Pennsylvania. So come on, let's get it done. I've lived here for 7 years. I've figured it out.
Well, I was going to say, you did move here after all, so you know what the final product is.
Right.
I just want to really emphasize the point about customer education. We in industry who are bringing valuable products to market, we also want customers to be educated, to be informed, to be empowered, and to make choices that align to their own values and priorities. We've talked a bit about Pennsylvania today, but a point that I learned just earlier this summer, the Pennsylvania's equivalent of the DPU's website, a shopping website, papowerswitch.com, receives 1 million visitors annually, predominantly residential customers that are going to the state website to learn about the competitive market, to understand the difference between fixed and variable products, and to compare products and find one that suits their needs. I mean, I think that's really an example of a state agency providing extremely valuable consumer-friendly access to information that then leads to those consumers having better outcomes in their shopping experience.
I do have to say one last thing about default supply. So over the last 6 to 9 months, default supply has been much higher than competitive supply offers in the marketplace, much higher. And nobody's coming in here, and I'm not, and saying, get rid of default supply. They were all ripped off. All these consumers, most of the Massachusetts consumers who stayed in default supply got ripped off. If you look, though, they did pay more than $1 billion had they, in fact, used their choice and knew about their choice, to your point, and gone to a cheaper offer. So we've got to absolutely take seriously the job of educating customers, but we also have to take seriously the job of making it easy for somebody to move from default supply to a competitive supplier, or vice versa. When default supply might be cheaper, be able to leave a competitive supplier and go to default supply. Right now, it's too difficult to move around in Massachusetts. Let's make it easier.
Thank you so much. Any other questions? Seeing none, I thank you both for your testimony.
Thank you.
Our next witness scheduled to testify is Young Kim.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I am here to testify against the market closure bills and in favor of market reform. So I've been a resident of Massachusetts for about 30 years, the last 20 in Brookline. And I used to live in an apartment building, and that's kind of where I first experienced switching. I signed up with the municipal aggregation program organized by the town of Brookline. Pretty cool program, I thought. And I saved a few bucks compared to the utility. And then I bought a house 6 years ago. My electricity usage doubled. And I thought, I'm going to try a little harder to find an electricity provider that gave me greater savings. And so I switched away from the municipal aggregation to find a supplier that kind of suited my needs at the time. And then, so my needs in my electricity choice have evolved over time. And of course, climate change has been pretty top of mind, I think, for a lot of us. So I bought an electric vehicle. And with that, of course, I knew my electricity usage was going to be even higher. And then came in the mail 2 years ago an offer for a flat bill, no matter how much I used, for $80 a month. And it was 100% renewable. So, it checked all the boxes for me. And so I thought I had this, locked in, figured out. And then about a year ago, we had electricity prices go sky high, right? And that was around the time that my electricity bill was scheduled to renew. And so at the time I was looking, what the default utility price would be. It was going to be around 26 cents per kilowatt hour. Energy Switch Mass, the choices there were not much better. Then my electricity provider at the time, offered me a renewal, and it was going to be $190 flat. And so I was like, all right, I guess, you kind of had me over a barrel, like I have to, renew with somebody. And, I understand that was what the market conditions were at the time, right? But, I thought, why don't I try to negotiate with my provider? And I said, well, can you keep it at $80 a month? Didn't know what I was going to get. They returned to me an offer of $95 per month. And so that's my experience with the competitive supply market. These companies, really want your business, right? So if you are willing to negotiate with them and you're a valuable customer, I think you can get a good deal in this market. And I think it's an extremely valuable tool as we decarbonize and electrify our houses, to have these options on the table. I can't imagine what would have happened to me, if I went back to the utility and I said, Eversource, I don't want to pay 26 cents. What can you do for me? Right? I mean, you're all laughing because you know what the answer is going to be, right? And so I think the value of the competitive market is really paramount. And I really hope you don't take that choice away.
Well, thank you for your testimony. Are there any questions for the witness? Seeing none, I thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our next witness to testify is another panel, Travis Kavula and Christopher Erkley.
Good afternoon. Chairman Roy and Vice Chairman Haggerty, members of the committee. My name is Travis Kavula. I'm Vice President of Regulatory Affairs for NRG. I'm a former state utility commissioner as well, like Mr. Hanger, and a past president of the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners. I always appreciated my collaboration in that role with the Massachusetts DPU and all of New England's representatives. NRG is a Fortune 200 energy company with about 7.5 million customers across North America, and we're one of the largest competitive suppliers of electricity in Massachusetts. And I'm here to testify in opposition to HB 3196 and SB 2106, which, as you've heard, would close the market for residential retail choice in Massachusetts. These bills would force many Massachusetts residential customers onto utility basic service rates, and the timing could not be worse. Those utility rates, as you've heard, saw enormous increases this past winter. Overnight, Massachusetts utility rates and their customers found themselves paying the second or third highest rates in the entire nation, depending on how you measure it, right behind Hawaii and California. The competitive supply market was the only relief valve for many of these customers. Literally every single competitive retail offering this past winter was below the utility's basic service rates. And these were not teaser rates. Many of them were for 6-month contracts, 12-month contracts, 24, 36-month contracts. And many customers signed up for those competitive rates. These savings are not hypothetical. Our largest retail brand in the state, Direct Energy, saw our residential customers save $418 between December and the beginning of summer this year on average. I realize that that doesn't conform to what the narrative you've heard from proponents, but as Mr. Hanger said, what they're telling you is data that stops in 2021. And even if we accept the recent amendment of that data made live today by the Attorney General, that data stops just after the war in Ukraine and misses the entirety of last winter. And in doing so, they're missing the whole ball game. They're ignoring how the world has changed and the new era of volatility and inflation that is now present in the energy markets. The type of flat rate products that my company offers is a remedy to that. We may not be below the basic service rate always, but we offer our customers price certainty in a time when the utility price has a lot of volatility. Instead of talking about how to close down this market, we should focus on how to get the 50% of residential customers who still are on basic service into the shopping market, even by encouraging them to do so if they don't select a product, to explore their options. Finally, there is no surge in customer complaints that warrants the drastic action being considered. The Attorney General's own data shows that the number of complaints filed against competitive suppliers has fallen 77% from 2018 to 2022, and those levels are comparable to those leveled against the largest utilities. We received, our companies, only 10 complaints during that period of time. We took all of them very seriously. 5 of those complaints concerned a line of business that we discontinued in relation to the number of concerns that we had with the business model. So we understand that there are changes needed to protect the market and to protect consumers. We support Representative Chan's proposal, and in particular support the idea of creating a competitive supplier-funded Office of Retail Market Oversight to improve enforcement. But after 25 years, we think it's time to reform this law, amend it instead of ending the law and repealing it altogether. Thank you very much for your time and the opportunity to present testimony.
Thank you for your testimony, Christopher.
Yep, thank you. Chairman Roy and members of the Joint Committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify in strong support of House Bill 3155 and opposition of House Bill 3196. My name is Christopher Eric Lee, President and CEO of the Retail Energy Advancement League, or REAL. REAL was formed by a coalition of companies that believe smart regulation and consumer protections are the foundation for a healthy market. I'd like to address 3 things that are imperative as we review this issue, and I know you've heard some of it already. Please note that I'll provide more substantive written comments that reference the materials that I speak about today. First, the reporting that supports market closure is incomplete and not comprehensive. Primarily, it doesn't include the past 2 years of retail market savings, and it doesn't account for additional value that retailers are providing consumers. To address the first issue on price and savings, I'd like to point to Connecticut that has very similar price volatility as Massachusetts. In Connecticut, the Office of Consumer Counsel issues a monthly report on the retail market. During the winter pricing period, 9 out of 10 customers that shopped with a retail provider saved relative to their standard utility offering. And in aggregate, there was over $100 million in savings to those customers over a rolling 12-month period. Again, these are not hypothetical numbers. The only difference in Massachusetts is that 2 times as many people are shopping here, and the price separation between utility offer and retail offer is actually larger. So again, a lot more savings. The second item is that there's a misbelief that suppliers don't care. I have an industry letter that I'll submit with my written testimony that has over 20 organizations and companies that represent the vast majority of the retail market, and they support House Bill 3155 and market reform. These companies don't like bad actors either and are committed to getting them out of the market. And third and lastly, consumers don't want market closure. Thousands of consumers have either signed a petition or have directly contacted their elected officials asking to preserve energy choice. This number is in contrast to the published complaint data that we've seen, and it shouldn't minimize the seriousness of a bad actor in the marketplace. The only way that the retail supply community can resolve this issue is if we're not working in the dark. We want to work directly with regulators. We want to resolve and prevent repeated action. And as we've stated before, we are prepared to work with any office on enforcement and measures of preventative action. Lastly, I'd like to leave with a quote from a report that was authored by the former Massachusetts DPU chairman, Paul Hibbard, who unfortunately could not attend today. He says some appear to lean towards doing away with retail choice due to the negative experiences with marketing to residential customers. But doing away with retail choice rather than improving it would be a mistake. Thank you for your time. I will also include that report in my written statement as well.
I appreciate your testimony. I do have a question, and I'm sure you heard the Attorney General and folks from her office testify today that we already have strong regulations and that folks are not adhering to the regulations that are in place now. And she did not believe that the additional enforcement provisions that were contained in Chair Chan's bill would have any impact. Well, how do you respond to that?
I'll just say that we have tried to reach out to the Attorney General's office. We want to have a meeting with them. We want to understand their concerns. We do have a meeting scheduled in October. We want to work through where that bill is missing pieces. But if you look at the substance of the bill, we attempt to address a number of things. One, marketing practices. Two, getting rid of bad actors in the marketplace. And three, if the bad actors do exit the marketplace, that there's enough security so that the state isn't left holding the bag. Go ahead. No.
And I'll just say, Chris referred to the AG. I'll just speak to the DPU. We and other suppliers have written letters over the last several years, asking that they recommence activity in a presently open docket 1907 that would enhance further the retail market protections for consumers. And I think the feedback we've gotten back informally, candidly, has been, well, we keep seeing these bills to shut down the market entirely. Why would we work on building a better mousetrap with that uncertainty hanging over the market? So I think in that spirit, we come in support of statutory enactments that create those reforms to the market, or at the very least, if there's not going to be a statutory enactment, then some clear sense of direction so that the regulator on its own authority can actually improve this. But it is true that other states have adopted some of these reforms lately, and I think they've served to discipline the market well for the time they've been enacted in those jurisdictions. No one to date has taken the step that this proposes, which is to eliminate residential choice entirely.
Could you supply us with information on the other states and the enforcement provisions that they have implemented and how successful they've been on that? Is that something you could get to us?
We definitely can.
And my last question is, I also heard the Attorney General suggest that they're really, although she kind of softened it a bit, the question of whether there are any good players in the space. I've heard repeatedly that they're all bad players. How do you respond to that?
I take the anecdotes that the Attorney General and others related extremely seriously. And I can tell you, if they concerned the conduct of our salespeople, and our retail energy brands don't do door-to-door marketing, but if they did, and we heard of that, it would likely result in a self-report, which we frequently do when we find our conduct falling short of our ethical expectations or our legal obligations in a particular jurisdiction. And so I can't speak to everyone in the market, but the people you've heard from here, Constellation, Clean Choice, ourselves, are well-respected, often public companies like us and Constellation. And as a former regulator and someone who well realizes that even though we're engaged in competitive supply and we're not quote unquote regulated utilities, that we are nevertheless subject to public interest regulation under the laws of the states that we operate in. I take those obligations as a former regulator extremely seriously. I would not be working for this company if we engaged in the type of activity that you've heard about today.
And the activity that we did hear about, I don't think there's a person in the room that would disagree that that's egregious behavior. I said one final question, but I'll take the liberty to ask one more. The provisions in the Chair Chan bill, how would those go to rid Massachusetts of these egregious practices.
Yeah, I mean, to just give one example, because it was sort of alluded to earlier, there was a suggestion that one supplier, which did exit the market and then subsequently went bankrupt due to some of the allegations that you're referring to, was able to walk away without paying any penalties. And the idea behind, posting bonds is that you have some kind of ring-fenced financial security posted that a state regulator can call upon that's safe harbored from the bankruptcy process and can be liquidated regardless of a strategic default or bankruptcy exit into the market. So I'm just full disclosure, I'm not a lawyer, even though I probably sound like one right now. You
play
want
one on TV.
Yeah, you want to be sure that that language actually precisely does that. But I know that's the spirit in which it's offered, to be able to have recourse to exactly what the AG's office was speaking about as a problem, which currently now is not in the law.
The other thing I'd just like to point out is that we talked about the Office of Consumer Oversight, a key component in House Bill 3155. That Office of Oversight is really meant to address, you heard from the AG's office, they are burdened with this issue. That Office of Oversight is financed by the retail supply community to help solve enforcement bandwidth.
Great. Thank you so much. Any other questions for the witness, Vice Chair Hagan?
On the marketing side of things, we continue to hear about the door-to-door, and that seems to be a consistent negative. Have you seen other states regulate or ban door-to-door sales?
Yeah, it's been oftentimes a two-punch approach where occasionally, and some of these regulations already exist, but you have to give notice in a particular census block or community that door-to-door marketers are going to be operating within that jurisdiction. You do have requirements for licensing and training, and you have requirements that the people who are engaged in that kind of marketing are ultimately responsible to and agents of the supplier selling the product. That's one of the provisions in Chairman Chan's pieces of legislation. And then one thing that I think speaks to some of the information asymmetry issues that was brought up earlier is the fact that there are real transaction costs in shopping for retail supply. You typically need, for example, your utility account number in order to make an enrollment. And while you may have that in trying to enroll in a product when you're shopping online or digitally, that is a piece of information that often resides within your home. And so door-to-door marketers have arisen in this industry because the people they're trying to sell something to have a piece of information in their home that they need. And consequently, that type of marketing is more prevalent, candidly, than it is in other industries. So trying to have methods of enrollment that push more toward digital, the result of consumer education that pushes more people into shopping on the online platforms like PA Power Switch has managed to do, that Energy Switch could be capable of doing. Those are important reforms, as are things like what we sometimes call enroll with your wallet. Being able to enroll in a service with having a separate piece of personally identifiable information rather than a utility account number that most people probably don't have memorized or ready access to. So it's both a carrot and a stick approach and an oversight approach, while also trying to make shopping easier and less of a hassle through easier to use online channels.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, I thank you both for your testimony.
Thank you.
Our next witness is Johannes Epke. Johannes?
Good afternoon, Chair Roy, Vice Chair Haggerty, members of the committee. My name is Johannes Epke. I'm a staff attorney at Conservation Law Foundation. I am testifying here today in support of an act relative to electric grid climate resilience and microgrids, Senate 2100, brought by Senator Cream, and House 3159, brought by your esteemed colleague, Representative Fernandez. Hurricane Lee fortunately largely passed us by out to sea, but we've been hit hard before. And as the climate and seas warm, storms will only get more intense and more frequent. And recent storms have revealed a critical fragility and lack of preparedness of our electric grid and the electric companies. And I'll give some figures in terms of storm cost recovery to illuminate the scale and scope of the problem. So Eversource and National Grid contribute $30 million and $16 million respectively annually into a storm fund. That's meant to be sort of the average cost of storm recovery. These funds are for both companies overdrawn by over $100 million. So we are falling behind. We are falling down on preparedness for the scope of storms that we see. The shocking figure, though, is Eversource is currently seeking the right to reimburse itself for over $440 million, including $100 million of carrying costs for just 3 storms that occurred in 12 months between 2021 and 2022. So that's almost 15 times the expected annual cost. These storms are getting more intense, they're getting more destructive, and it's only going to get worse. The bill we have proposed here would require the DPU to mandate that these companies do vulnerability assessments and file by the end of next year a resilience plan for their grid and every 5 years thereafter. The other component of the bill encourages the development of microgrids, a key technology in ensuring electric resilience, especially for critical infrastructure, emergency responders, shelters, and so forth. The Department of Public Utilities has looked at this issue. CLF has filed a petition with the department 2 years ago and again earlier this year. They have not yet taken action on this. There is some discussion as part of the grid modernization process that would require the companies to do this, but it is such a critical issue that we see a belt and suspenders approach as being warranted here, making the authority and the duty of the DPU to undertake this work very explicit. We will file some more detailed written testimony and happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Any questions for the witness? Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Next witness to testify is Stephen Linsky. Stephen?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Oh, great. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. I had submitted some prepared testimony that I'm not going to read into the record. It was approximately 3 minutes long, but in the interest of time, allow me to introduce myself. I'm Stephen Linsky. I'm a resident of East Hampton, and I'm a lifelong resident of Massachusetts. I sit on the Climate Action Now's Legislative Committee. On behalf of CAN, we offer this testimony in support of House Bill 755, Senate Bill 2091. They was sponsored by Representative Blay, who testified earlier. She was joined by Representative Dom, Lewis, Scarsdale, and Sabadosa. We love them all, and Senator Comerford. Our thanks to them. We adopt the testimony that was offered by Representative Blay and the Arcadia Center. And basically, the reason why we have given this particular bill our highest level of support is because it finally takes the step of which is necessary of shifting the role of energy system planning from investor-owned utilities to unconflicted experts whose expertise extends beyond mere utility boundaries. This is important. I think that this legislature has to decide about whether or not ultimately, the state's energy policies are going to be consistent and align with the state's climate policies. My utility sits both in terms of electric and gas. And as an investor-owned utility, I don't really think it ought to also serve as a planning architect to our climate policies. There's an inconsistency there that was stated in the earlier testimony, and we adopt. So I thank you for that. One last thing, Mr. Chair, since you mentioned it earlier about EVs, if I could take a personal privilege of mentioning that I'm an EV owner, and while I have you assembled, I would only mention that as a lifelong resident of Massachusetts, we shouldn't have to go up and down our one turnpike without the ability to charge. If we're not a Tesla, that's kind of shameful. So I'm hoping that that's a quick fix that your committee will make sure is is done in the not too distant future. But in the meantime, we ask for your support to report favorably out House 755 and Senate 2091.
Well, amen, I say to your personal privilege. Being an EV owner myself and making that trek up and down the pike, you speak very well. So thank you for that, and thank you for your testimony. Let me see if there are any questions. I see none. I thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next witness is Christina Montgomery. Christina.
Good afternoon, Chairman Roy, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Christine Montgomery. I am the Director of Regulatory Policy for Vistra Corp. We appreciate the opportunity to offer testimony today in strong support of House Bill 3155. Vistra is a leading Fortune 500 integrated retail energy and power generation company. We provide essential services to 4 million customers throughout 20 states and the District of Columbia. We also have 37,000 megawatts of power generation, including nuclear, solar, battery storage, natural gas, and wind. We like to think as the advent of electric competition as the advent of consumer empowerment. By choosing a provider and a product, customers are voting for a value proposition that matters to them. Many suggest that residential customers are only interested in price savings. Price may be the reason consumers enter the market, but it is not the reason they stay. You've heard a lot of statistics about the competitive market today, but statistics hide the human element because every one of our customers isn't a statistic. They're a person, like an electric vehicle owner looking for a plan to charge their vehicle overnight for free, or someone who's recently lost their job and selects a prepaid plan so they can put a little money in their electricity account each week. A fundamental principle of competitive markets is the ability for the customer to choose. And the Commonwealth is set to take that one step further with widespread adoption of AMI. This technology enables retail suppliers like Vistra to offer innovative products directly focused on meeting each customer's individual needs. However, the proposals in House Bill 3155 are critical to making those products reality by modernizing the retail market. So what does a market as envisioned by House Bill 3155 look like? In a robust market with AMI and the ability to build long-lasting relationships with our customers, we are able to offer products like free nights and solar days, 100% solar power to customers during the day powered by our solar farms and totally free electricity at night, or EV miles free where customers can charge their vehicles at home all night and morning at no cost. These types of products have the benefit of being both pro-consumer and pro-climate because they can reduce consumption by more than 10% simply by providing price signals to customers. These types of products are only possible with the implementation of AMI. This legislation will position the Massachusetts market to realize new benefits of market protections and product innovation, and thereby expand the benefits of customer choice. I hope the committee will join us in support of this important bill for the betterment of the customer and the Commonwealth. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
I just want to repeat at least one of the questions I had asked previous folks. You heard the Attorney General's office talk about some egregious practices, and I wonder if you could help inform us as to how 3155 would help address those complaints and perhaps remove those players from the marketplace. I would assume you would agree they should not be in the space, but.
Certainly, absolutely. At Vistra, one of our core principles is we do business the right way. And with respect to our retail business, one of our mottos is that we earn every customer every day. So we want and we envision a market where customers are informed and educated and suppliers are transparent, and accountable. So to your question, absolutely yes. We want to raise the bar in the market. We want responsible retail suppliers operating in the Commonwealth. And I know Mr. Kabula mentioned a number of different ways this legislation accomplishes that. One thing that I would like to highlight is the requirement of supplier complaint reporting. We have long encouraged the DPU to publish complaint statistics so customers can be informed as to their chosen retail supplier and their performance. I think elements like that go a long way in educating customers and also helping them to make informed decisions. And you'll hear us, the players that are in this room, actively advocate for increased transparency, and we've supported efforts to implement complaint scorecards across our footprint.
Thank you so much. Any other questions for the witness? Seeing none, I thank you very much. Our next witness is Stephanie Donner, and I know Stephanie is expected to testify virtually. Sure. Okay, all right. Thank you very much. That's a great 3 minutes. Our next witness is Devin McCoy. Devin, are you with us?
Good afternoon, members of the committee. My name is Devin McGoy. I am a community organizer at Green Roofs. We are a community-based organization that fights for environmental justice priorities and higher quality of life in Chelsea and East Boston. And I am here today to testify in support of House Bill 3196, an act relative to ratepayer protections. My organization believes that it is imperative that the legislature moves with speed to ban competitive electric suppliers. These companies have been preying on Massachusetts residents, especially low-income and immigrant families, for far too long. In my on-the-ground work as a community organizer, I have heard countless stories of these companies illegally gaining entry into apartment buildings, deceptively telling residents that they are working with Eversource or working with the city, pursuing people inside department stores, and flat out lying that their programs save people money. I have seen bills charging people upwards of 49 cents per kilowatt hour, which was double Eversource's rates in Chelsea and East Boston as of last winter and 3 times currently. These companies take advantage of our immigrant neighbors who lack the English skills and knowledge of our energy system to understand what these companies are doing and are capable of. These companies take advantage of the general public's lack of understanding of the energy system and steal people's personal information to sign them up for programs that they did not give their permission for. My organization's vision for the future of the energy system is one of energy democracy. That is a clean energy system that people feel empowered to participate in, that lowers the energy burden for low-income people, promotes community-wide resilience, and creates an opportunity for wealth creation. But one major roadblock that we have run into is how we can create a participatory energy system when people are suspicious of any conversation that has to do with energy because they have been burned by these programs before. Approximately half of my work currently is, unfortunately, undoing the damage that these competitive electric supply companies have wrought in Chelsea and East Boston. In nearly every educational workshop, focus group, and one-on-one conversation that I hold as a community organizer, I have to educate people on how these scams work, how they can be avoided, and what people should do if they have already fallen victim to them. In my hundreds of conversations with people about these issues, I have seen exactly 2 favorable situations in which folks are saving money by a few cents, and that was only during last winter during the price hikes. These competitive electric supply companies are robbing environmental justice communities of a full opportunity to participate in constructing the future of our energy system because so much of our time is spent educating community members about scams and rebuilding the trust and openness to conversations about energy issues that these companies, many of whom have been named today, have destroyed. We know that the energy burden is already disproportionately high for these communities and that competitive electric supply companies are making this economic inequality worse. Banning competitive electric suppliers is one of the most straightforward and highest impact actions that the legislature can take to lower energy burden in these communities. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your testimony. Are there any questions for the witness? Seeing none, I thank you. And call on Gary Meltz. Gary, are you with us? Gary Meltz. Right. Next witness is Alexa Rosenblum. Alexa?
Hi, you can hear me? Okay.
Yes, indeed.
My name is Alexa Rosenblum. I'm an attorney and clinical instructor in the Consumer Protection Clinic of the Legal Services Center of Harvard Law School. And I come before you today in enthusiastic support of H3196, Senate 2106. I represent low-income consumers in a variety of areas from debt collection defense to foreclosure prevention. But in the last few years, I've started representing low-income consumers in a new area, those negatively affected by the predatory competitive electricity market. Each of the roughly dozen low-income consumers I've represented has a slightly different story, but they all have the same ending. They were switched to a more expensive competitive supply. The word choice has been used a lot today, but there is no informed choice for most consumers in this market. Most of my clients did not even know they were switching suppliers because of the predatory tactics used in door-to-door and telephone marketing. Even those of my clients who knew they were switching to competitive electricity did so upon promises of cost savings which never materialized. Their choices were based on material misrepresentations. I wish I could say that one supplier, one marketer was the problem, but that's not what my clients' stories, which show at least about a half a dozen suppliers show. Instead, they show universal problems with the industry, false promises of savings, misrepresentations of providers' relationships with utility companies, and worst, preying on the most vulnerable of consumers. I was prepared to give you some specific examples. I know you've gotten a lot from the Attorney General's office, so I won't give you those. Rather, I'll address a question that's been repeated here. Can't we just add more consumer protections? I'm a consumer protection lawyer. I believe very strongly in consumer protections, but the answer is no. Protections and rules are not self-enforcing, and we just can't have dozens and dozens of lawsuits or civil regulatory actions against various suppliers. That's what we need, and that's what we would need to fix this industry, and it's not realistic. The AG's office has already told
Can
you
I
her
ask you?
office. Yeah.
Can I ask you why that's not realistic?
The AG's office has already told you that she would need to expand her department, tenfold to do the, or if not more, her entire office would need to devote their resources. As far as private enforcement, there are arbitration clauses and class action waivers in basically every single contract in this market. So we can't do private enforcement en masse because the companies are not allowing for that in their contracts. You would have to do each one of these as a single arbitration against a company. It would take you, it's like whack-a-mole, right? An individual consumer, you might be able to get released for, but not for the entire number of consumers that sign up with a particular company.
Why not urge us to change those provisions?
The number of changes that would be required would be astronomical. Those are, it's the kind of thing that, as I said, to have private enforcement, we have good protections, as the Attorney General's office said. We just, it's a game of whack-a-mole to enforce the protections, either those that exist or those that are proposed. It's just not, the entire market is rotten, and to play whack-a-mole with an entire market is a losing game, unfortunately.
Well, thank you so much for your testimony. Are there any other questions for the witness? Vice Chair Haggerty.
Two questions. One, of the folks you've represented, how many have been brought into the market by telephone versus door to door? And secondly, if you could just discuss the outcomes.
Sure. Yeah, it's about, I would say it's about half and half, a bit of both. A number were door to door, and I would say most of them didn't realize what was happening. I had an elder with dementia who had zero recollection of the call with the telemarketer. The call with the door-to-door solicitor. Her daughter realized it later by looking at her bills, how much they had gone up, and realized she'd been signed up as a supplier. Those are the things that are typical a low-income consumer with an intellectual disability. She had had 4 different suppliers without realizing it. Somebody looking at her bill when she was applying for fuel assistance realized it. She had no idea. Those kinds of things are typical. So I don't have the numbers, but I think it's about even as far as telemarketers and door to door. And I would say I have gotten good outcomes because I'm an attorney. I can write a demand letter and get somebody basically the money back for the costs that the excessive costs they've paid. But individual consumers without help are not getting the same outcomes. In fact, they're having extreme difficulty even getting out of this market. Their termination fees in a lot of fixed contracts, fixed rate contracts, and low income consumers can't afford those amounts and find it extremely difficult to cancel contracts. So yeah.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? Seeing none, I thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
And thank you. And the final witness we have signed up to testify is David Dayton. David. Remarkable stamina. Superior.
Thank you. I'm David Dayton, Chairman of Clean Energy Solutions in Boston. I'm here in support of House 3159, which is the Utility Climate Resilience and Microgrid bill. I'm just going to address the microgrid part. I think that's the harder part of the bill, actually, the more controversial part. And I think we have a way to make it work. So I'm a microgrid engineer. I've developed solar and hydro and wind projects in this country and Costa Rica for 40 years. I just want to point out that there are many microgrids in the world, almost all supported by utility wiring. Campuses, hospitals, military bases, neighborhood streets, and so forth. They have 2 purposes, as you know. One is resilience. So if there's an emergency, the facilities that are connected to the microgrid can island, so to speak, and continue to have heat and power and ventilation and cooling and refrigeration and all of the things essential to EJ neighborhoods and to critical facilities. That's perhaps the most important benefit, but there's a second one, which is it benefits the grid if we can remove a lot of load, a lot of electrical load simultaneously during peak hours. And that's the second thing that a good microgrid can do by aggregating those loads and being able to remove them automatically during peak hours. So utilities frequently do this in microgrids that we all know about, but there are times when the utility wires are overloaded, or perhaps they're in a network configuration, or perhaps they're very expensive adaptations to be made and very long delays in making this work. And so what this bill does is to offer the city a way around that delay and around those limitations by allowing it to wire its own loads, its own buildings together, and wire in a local source of power. We prefer solar power and batteries, of course. That would be unsafe and against the law and against code and so forth if it were done casually. But if it's done correctly, it's with wiring that's behind the meter and behind transfer switches, it can operate safely. The criteria are stay behind the meter and the transfer switch. Don't sell power to anybody else. That's a utility right. Don't cross other people's property. And connect the facilities only after you disconnect from the grid. So in fact, the facilities in a municipality that's participating would not be connected during normal operations, but only when there's an emergency, or when the utility says, we've got a peak load here and we'd like to remove that load. I believe that benefits EJ communities and utilities, and all of us. And be happy to work with the staff to perhaps make a few adjustments to the bill so that that can be done legally and safely.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Are there any questions for the witness? Seeing none, I appreciate it. Thank you. And thank you, everyone, for your patience and perseverance during the hearing. And I will close this hearing at this time. Thank you.